We're going to start with Wendigoon today. We're going to be doing a game too scary for 3D, the hidden story of Faith, the Unholy Trinity. No idea what this is, but you guys recommended it, so I'm going to be checking that out. We know who Wendigoon is though, and I'm ready for this, you know. Today I got a whole bowl of candy, I got lemonade I just ate, I have water, and a whole big canteen of water. So I'm actually like, I'm ready to go today, you know. We on a roll, and I'm just happy that I'm this prepared. If anything, I'm just chilling that I'm this ready, you know. That being said though, I think it's about time we just start getting into the recordings of the day. Yeah, YouTube, I did record this all live on Twitch. So if you want to stop by and be part of the, you know, the chat, stop by, follow me there. Besides that though, as always, do not forget to like and subscribe, because that helps me out so very much, and you know, it'd be very amazing. Besides that though, I'm interested to see what this is, since I never heard of it. So without further ado, let's get right into it, you know? Let's get into the bizwax.
As a lot of you probably know, I'm a big fan of anything scary.
Yeah.
Whether that be scary movies, scary stories, or as we're going to talk about today, scary video games. And if you're a fan of horror games, then you and I have been eating good for the past several years. From the new Resident Evil games to the Dead Space remake, and releases I'm very excited for in the future, like Alan Wake 2, and with the genre itself.
I still have to play any of I still have to play any of those games, but I'm very excited to play Resident Evil 4. I want to play eventually. I played 2 and 3, the remakes, and they were good. Is that a deer with a knife, with the binoculars on its head in the back? Why do you have that?
Itself becoming more mainstream as works of video game horror get adapted into other forms of media, like the Last of Us TV show, or
which was good.
The Five Nights at Freddy's movie, meaning that more eyes are looking towards the genre, which means more money.
Hot take: the FNAF movie was okay. It was good. It wasn't amazing. It wasn't a blow out the park thing, but it was good. It was good, and I stand by that. I will die on that hill. It wasn't amazing. I could agree on that. Alright, it wasn't great, but it was good at least. And that's all I care about. I'm just happy we got a movie, okay?
Is being spent on it, which means bigger budgets and hopefully even better games.
Yeah.
Still holding out hope that Silent Hill 2 remake becomes Silent Hills PT. Maybe, I'll never let it go. But somehow in the midst of all of that, in the midst of new titans coming out of this genre, and old classics being made new, somehow one of the most impressive games that I've seen out of the past decade is an 8-bit Atari 2600 style game.
Oh, wow, it's an 8-bit Atari type. That's interesting.
By one guy. And that game, of course, is Faith, the Unholy Trinity is truly a work beyond the sum of its parts. In a style that Erdorf, the game's creator, describes as the Oregon Trail meets The Exorcist, Faith, the Unholy Trinity is immediately appealing to anyone who enjoys retro, 8-bit style video games. And anyone who looks past that surface will find some of the most creative and gruesome concepts ever put to screen. The atmospheres, aesthetics, and concepts of this game are all drenched in the passion of their creator. Erdorf has gone above and beyond to show us the lengths that art can reach when done by someone who really means it. Even if you've never played Faith before, you're probably familiar with it, either from the memes or references.
Ah, damn, I'm just trying to watch something. You didn't have to knock me out like that. Also, hey, Miku, how you doing?
A lot of people have made online, such as the word mortis, or this gif of a rake-like creature moving around on the floor.
I have seen the one on the right.
And in most of those discussions you'll hear online, people tend to focus on either the look of the game, the whole 8-bit art style, or the horror and scares of the game itself. And while we're going to talk about both of those because they're both impressive, and truly this game has one of the most disturbing concepts I've ever heard out of anything scary ever. Like, for real, wait till we get to what the second death ritual is. It is incredibly terrible. I love it. But what I want to focus on today is an aspect of the game that I feel is just as impressive, but often overlooked, and that's the story. If you run through the game beating all of the required boss fights and sprinting to the end, you'll see some signs of this greater world the game is set in. But if you take the time to read all of the notes that can be discovered throughout the game, participate in all of the extra boss fights and side quests, and overall think about the actions that you're committing, the story of Faith, the Unholy Trinity, becomes something truly special and I feel deserves to be talked about. And that's exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to go through the entirety of Faith, the Unholy Trinity, look at all the storyline events, look at all the side content, and come to the conclusion of what this game's really about. Or at least what this self-entitled pretentious YouTuber says that this game is really about.
Okay.
Now with that, there are a couple things of note.
All right.
For one, I had an interview with the creator of Faith, the Unholy Trinity,
who
goes by the name Airdorf, and that entire interview is over on my second channel. Airdorf and I had a great time discussing the themes of his game, where his inspiration as a creator comes from, where the inspiration for this story comes from, what a lot of the characters mean, a lot of cut side content, and for those of us that are a fan of the game, word about future projects, which was very exciting. Airdorf was very gracious to lend me his time, and while segments of that interview will pop up in this video, if you want to listen to the whole thing, the link to it will be in the description. Both him and I would really appreciate it if you did. And two, and more importantly, if you have not yet been convinced to check out this game for yourself, then I don't know how to help you. It's great. Go do it. As a matter of fact, it's so great, I would hate for this video to be your first exposure to it, and you get all of the story beats and experience ruined for you before you ever press play.
I'll enjoy it no matter what.
Right? Down in the description somewhere, there will be a link to the Steam tab for Faith, the Unholy Trinity. And if at any point through this video you think that this sounds really cool, pause the video, go play the game, and then come back, and again, we'll talk about it together instead of me just talking at you, even though you people like that for some reason. And of course, a lot of the content that I am going to be bringing up in this analysis is, as mentioned, gruesome, and a lot of it is very disturbing and personal to a lot of people who have experiences with maybe things like cults, or heavy-handed religions, or the devil. So for this entire video, let me state now, if those topics are a lot for you, then maybe set this one out. Viewer discretion is advised. And of course, all of this means that once again, I am creating another video that is to the detriment of my audience. At this point, if anyone wanted to have a legal case against me, perhaps an organization like the FBI, perhaps, and they were to just read out the titles of my video to a courtroom, I would be placed under the jail. So in an effort to slightly turn the tables a little bit, if I'm going to sit here and corrupt your mind and soul for the next couple hours, the least I can do is help out your body. That was a weird way to say it, but we're going to stick to it. So while I corrupt your mind, you might as well take care of your body.
Ad break.
With today's sponsor, AG1.
I knew it. I was like, ad break? This is a weird segue if it is.
And I have to
say, yeah, it was. All right.
I'm absolutely loving it.
Oh, that's a Wendigo in the background.
AG1 is a dietary supplement that can assist with everything from your daily energy to your digestion to even your immune system. And AG1 does this not by being some pseudoscience supplement or a dozen pills that you have to take every morning, and is instead your daily intake of vitamins and nutrients in one easy drink. The drink is composed of things like B12, zinc, morning, and you can do right by your body even more so. Again, go to the link in the description at drinkag1.com/Wendigoon to get in on AG1 and receive your 2 free gifts. Taking care of your body and getting your daily energy shouldn't be difficult. And now with AG1, it doesn't have to be. Again, go to the link in the description and get in on this offer today. Thank you all so much for watching the ad. Thank you so much to AG1 for sponsoring this video. It really does mean the most. Hope you all check them out. Link is in the description. And we are back to the video. And with all that out of the way, I hope that you're as excited as I am.
Yeah.
So we're going to go ahead and get into it.
Let's see what
but
this
as
is.
always, thank you for watching.
As
soon as we boot up the game, we're treated to a couple of important story beats.
All right.
For one, on the game's load screen, we see the message, "Gary loves you," displayed over and over. That doesn't mean a lot to us now, but it will soon. And then after this, we're given our first cutscene.
I know this is gonna annoy people, but when I see Atari games like this, because I've been so FNAF pilled, I just remember and think about the FNAF minigames. I know other things exist outside of that. I'm aware, but it's just, I can't stop thinking about it. Alright? I see a car, I think Midnight Motorist, okay?
September 21st,
oh God.
1987.
Not the V1 voice. I know it's not from V1 originally, but that's all I can think about.
It's been 1
Ultra
year
Kill has
since
really
I
just
first
messed my
went
mind up
inside
on that.
house. I have to finish what I started.
What did you start?
What I am about to do has not been approved by the Vatican.
Ah.
So already, we've established a few things off the bat. For one, it seems whoever is driving this vehicle has some relation to the Catholic Church, hence mentioning approval from the Vatican. Given that this is a horror game, and given everything else about
Demons,
it, we can assume this has
cults.
to do with an exorcism.
Yes.
And whatever this exorcism might be, it's taking place 1 year after whatever happened in the house. And we also now know that this game is set in 1987. Not only does this match the retro aesthetic of the game itself, but Erdorf has said that one of his main inspirations for the game was the satanic panic of the 80s, and all of the conspiracies and horror stories that began to surmount around the idea of demonic cults. So the year that the game is set in both matches the visuals as well as the theme of the story itself. Originally, Faith was 3 separate games that released at different times, until eventually being bundled all together in the Unholy Trinity. I know that before the bundle there were some discrepancies into some of the information given on notes, and some stuff that was supposedly canon was made non-canon and stuff like that. So for the sake of clarity, and also because you can't access those old games anymore, I'm sticking with the timeline of events and progression that is shown in the Unholy Trinity. Game. And with that, we now begin in Chapter 1. We pick up right where the intro cutscene left off, with the guy who was driving the car now standing outside of it on the side of the road.
What is that, Tombstone?
2 things become immediately striking as soon as the player takes control. For one, the game's music design. Not only does the music set the atmosphere for the horror that we're about to experience, but as the game progresses, we're going to see some incredible stuff that Erdorf manages to pull off with the 8-bit music scale. The other thing that the player will notice is that there are only 2 controls available. Those controls are movement and Jesus. That's not even a joke.
The cross.
All that the player can do is move around with the WASD keys and then hit the space bar to hold up a cross.
Knew it. Yeah.
And I'm not kidding when I say this. Those are the only 2 buttons that you will press for the entire series. There's one segment I can think of off the top of my head where the cross gets replaced for a camera, but then you're still just hitting the spacebar and moving around. It is incredible the amount of gameplay Erdorf manages to pull off using those 2 controls. As you're standing here wandering around your car on the side of the road, you'll probably notice something. Given the mention of the Vatican from the intro and the fact that our character's only item is a cross, and not to mention the white pixel on his neck that represents a clerical collar, we can deduce that our character is a priest. We will come to find out that this priest, the blue sprite that we play as throughout these games, is a man named John Ward. So already we have some pieces coming together. It seems that a year ago, this John Ward, or Father Ward, came to a house to perform what was most likely an exorcism. And now, on September the 21st of 1987, he has returned to finish what he started. However, for some reason, this trip has not been approved by the Vatican. All questions that will be answered later. As we venture from our car, we see that the screen will load in different segments of the map as we enter them. And if you walk all the way to one side of the map, you will be moved to the opposite side of the map. So for example, if you walk all the way to the left, you'll just teleport to the right. The map isn't randomly generated, although it can feel that way if you're like me and on your first playthrough you just walk to the right forever. A few things can happen while you're just randomly perusing the woods. For one, if you're walking along the roadside, there is a random chance for a tractor trailer to spawn. This tractor trailer moves quickly from one side of the screen to the other, and again, if you're like me and don't know what you're doing, you can get killed by it. The tractor trailer says Airdorf on the side of it, which is a cool reference to the game's creator. But believe it or not, this truck will come into the story later. The other, much more terrifying detail is that as you're walking through the map from one segment to the other, there's a random chance that, with no warning at all, this thing will spawn out of nowhere and chase the player down. And if you don't manage to stop it, this cutscene will play.
Damn, man had the munchies.
What the player is supposed to do whenever this creature spawns in is hold up their cross using the spacebar, which wards the beast away. This quickly teaches the player that their crucifix is a weapon. It can be assumed that we're battling demonic forces throughout the game, given the game's title and that thing we just saw, so it makes sense that the image of the crucifix wards them off. Whenever this creature appears on screen, the music drops out and we hear its garbled speech as it gets closer. When we ward it away, it will say some eerie line as it's chased off the side of the screen. References to demonic sayings or demons in literature, or just references to old internet horror stories like I have the body of a pig, which not only is a cool old internet lore reference for nerds like me, but as mentioned by Airdorf in our interview, also lines up with the story from the Bible of demons being thrown into the bodies of swine. So as we're walking through the woods, paranoid of what creature may spawn next, things like a derelict tree or an old wishing well, or even an animal sacrifice. If the player remembers what they learned during the attack, holding up their cross seems to do the trick. If you hold your cross on many of the strange items you come across in the game, it will cause the item to be exorcised, and a note will spawn out of it. This is the primary method for which the story of faith is told, or at least the supplemental materials as to what we see on screen. These notes not only give us greater lore to the series itself, but are some of the most fascinating parts of the story as a whole. So of course, we're going to go through them. Now while wandering through the woods, you can come across these notes in any order. So I'm going to relay them to you in an order that I think makes the most sense, although this isn't any canon interpretation to the order they're supposed to be read. And with these notes, we gain context as to who may be involved and why Father Ward is even here in the first place. So with that, we find our first note.
Today, I noticed Amy's favorite tree looks like it's dying. All of the needles are falling off it and the bark is peeling. I guess I'm more upset about it than Amy is. She is totally absorbed in her volunteer work at the clinic. I guess it's good that she found something she's passionate about, but I've gotten ugly looks from some of the women at book club. Kathy and her religious friends won't even talk to me anymore.
We'll come to find out that the woman writing this letter is a woman named Cindy, and that Cindy is the mother of Amy. So Cindy says that Amy's favorite tree is dying, but Amy doesn't seem to care because she's spending so much time at this clinic she's began working at. A clinic that, for some reason, Cindy's religious friends don't want to associate with her over. After this, we find another note from Cindy.
Why?
I caught some people walking through the woods around the house last week. Not kids, just regular adults. They told me they got lost while hiking, and I pointed them back towards the road. The whole thing just didn't feel right. I think I should go dig up Bob's rifle out of storage.
Good plan.
Well, this gives creepy vibes that there may just be some strangers on the property, and maybe Cindy's just overreacting. The next note definitely tells us something's probably wrong.
Bob. The kids and I miss you more every day. The twins and Amy have started their next school year here at home. Amy keeps asking when she's going to be allowed to go to real school. I think she's getting cabin fever. The twins are having no problems occupying their time. Yesterday, they came in with their hands covered in blood. I guess they found a dead deer and thought it would be a good idea to touch it.
I don't know about that.
Problem because when I went out with them to look at the dead deer, it was a pretty gruesome sight. All this just a day after the twins' birthday party. Can't wait till you come home.
I don't...
So this immediately tells us that something is not good. Amy isn't Cindy's only kid. She has a pair of twins as well. And these twins are apparently playing in deer carcasses for some reason. Not only that, but Cindy mentions that the carcass was mangled to an unnatural degree. Yeah. While exploring this area, another note that we'll find is an invitation to a birthday party. This birthday party is for two boys, Nate and Jason, who are both turning 6. Nate and Jason being the name of the two twins mentioned earlier. This birthday invitation also serves a second purpose, because if you're like me and were hopelessly lost on your first playthrough, the mention at the bottom of the birthday card that says to go straight past the well will help players that are lost but remembered that they saw a well earlier. And also, the name of the road they live on is called Snake Meadow Hill Road, which, I mean, like, at that point, you're just asking for something bad to happen. It also gives us more context to Cindy's note about the kids playing in a dead deer. I mean, like, if they were like 10 or 11, I'd let it pass. But two 6-year-olds playing in a deer carcass? No. Erdorf has also been
that makes sense.
Very open that there were a lot of ideas.
It's like at 10, you'd be like, oh, curiosity got the best of them. At 6, you'd be like, what were you doing near that? Hello.
He had in Faith Chapter 1 that didn't really pan out and didn't go anywhere. Like, for example, there's some notes you'll find during this area that will mention, like, a historical society, or it'll mention, like, gravestones being found on the property or stuff like that, which kind of add to the mood, but they don't relate to the overall narrative, or at least what the narratives become now, so I'm not really going to talk about them. I will mention, though, while I'm bringing up stuff I'm not going to talk about, there is another YouTuber here on YouTube whose name is Flaw Peacock, and I'm not going to say it all together. I get the joke, but no. I'll link his video series in the description. He did a series looking into faith that, I mean, that series has got, I think it's like 5 hours. Which sounds like something I would do, but he did a fantastic.
Seeing as this thing is 4 hours and 23 minutes long, yeah, it seems like something you would do. I believe it.
Fantastic breakdown of all of the lore, looking at every piece that did go into the story, every piece that did.
Oh, chat, I do have a Halloween candy next to me, right? So if I go quiet and you see my models like smack the floor, I'm letting you know I probably ate some poison. Alright, chat, alright? Or somebody laced the candy or something, alright? If I start tweaking out, you guys already know. I have a bucket full of Halloween ice cream. Ow! So if I die or start tweaking out, somebody laced it. I'm letting you know ahead of time. Alright, chat?
Making sense of it all. I'm here mostly to focus on a narrative and tell you all about, like, the overall themes of the game. But if you just, like, are interested in the analytics and, like, a deep dive into all the lore and notes that can be found and stuff, check his video out. He did great work and he deserves the support. Again, link in the description. Sticking to our track, however, the next note we find is a note from John Ward himself. This note referencing his first excursion 1 year ago to the house on Snake Meadow Hill Road.
Oh, it's gonna be him probably. Finding out the twins are possessed or something. Also, the chocolate has a USB full of Seinfeld episodes stuffed inside. Imagine. I'd be so mad if I took a bite out of a chocolate and I bite into metal. I'm just like, no. I gotta restart in life at that point. It's over.
The Martin's house lies about 100 yards off of Snake Meadow Hill Road. There's almost no driveway. Trees just out in the middle of a gravel path that is mostly covered in grass. It was difficult to find the house, especially since it was already dark when we arrived. Father Alred seemed to know where he was going. He simply drove straight ahead until we arrived at the house. In the headlights, I saw an old shed off to the right of the path. Father Alred explained that he would rather perform the exorcism away from the house, but the Martins had insisted that Amy remain inside. He complained that having the family present makes it difficult to proceed with elements of the rite that may seem harsh to the layperson. So first of all, we have a last name to the family of Cindy, Amy, Nate, and Jason, the Martins. And in one of Cindy's notes from earlier, we saw that Cindy referred to her husband as Bob. So now we have the names of all 5 members of the Martin family.
Yep.
It seems that 1 year ago, John came to this house on Snake Meadow Hill Road with another priest, a priest named Father Allred. And we also see from
he's
this
not
note
here,
that
so,
John Ward and
what
Allred
happened?
were here to exorcise the young Amy Martin. Allred wanted the exorcism to be conducted in a shed, but her parents wouldn't have it and wanted Amy to be kept in the house. We find this note just outside of a shed located in the middle of the woods. Upon walking into the shed,
look, you see it crawling.
we find a key, and when we
saw
try
that.
to
It
leave
was
the
crawling.
shed, we are
Yeah,
once
there it
again
is.
attacked by this crawling creature. If you've been wandering around the woods for any amount of time, then you've ran into this creature several times
What is it,
up until
though?
now. If you manage to ward this creature off a total of 10 times, it won't come back anymore. And on that 10th
interesting.
attempt, it will drop another note.
Father Garcia, you are hereby instructed to release Michael Davies from your care and return him to his home immediately. Mr. and Mrs. Davies have already been contacted by our office. A representative of the church is currently en route to their home to discuss compensation in return for their discretion. You will meet our representative there and accompany him back to Rome. Cardinal Gifford.
So from this
Oh,
note,
it's even
we
wrong,
learned
wrong.
that there is a priest by the name of Father Garcia, and this Father Garcia has done something for a cardinal to become very upset with him. This Father Garcia seems to be holding somebody named Michael Davies, and it's causing such a problem that the cardinal wants Garcia to come back to Rome. So who is this Father Garcia, and who is Michael Davies, and why won't Father Garcia let him go? All questions for later. Eventually, while traveling straight past the well, John will find himself standing in front of the Martin household, with the brief image of some purple figure standing in the upstairs window. Using the key that we found in the shed, we're able to enter in. While standing in the living room of the house, we find another note from John Ward.
Purple figure. There's a purple figure in this painting. Are they somehow related?
This being his second note about what happened at the Martin household 1 year ago.
Mr. and Mrs. Martin greeted us at the front porch. Mr. Martin led us downstairs to the basement, explaining that Amy was down there in restraints.
No, chat. Please don't call it Afton. I was holding in the joke. You know how hard it was for me to hold the joke for you guys just to blur it out? I was gonna say, oh my god, it's the purple guy. Woo. My boy, Mr. Afton. But nah.
I felt for
okay,
him.
all right. That's what
There
I
was
get for
guilt
biting
and
my
shame
tongue.
in his voice. Amy was in the very back of the attic in a chair, perfectly calm, staring at us. It is hard to describe the look on her face. It was not the kind of look a child gives you.
So it seems that the Martins had to tie up their own
I was
daughter
grabbing a
before the
chocolate. That actually scared me. I was grabbing a chocolate. Jesus.
priest arrived
That
for
was
the
not
exorcism.
fun.
Also, John's note here seems a little bit strange, right? Because it goes from describing the scene in the basement to all of a sudden they're in the attic. And we'll talk about why that might be in a minute. While walking through the house, we'll notice things in the environment, as well as other things that we can exercise to receive more notes.
Let me guess, the
For
painting.
example, we
Yep.
see a painting of Bob, Cindy, and their daughter, Amy. And then when walking into the kitchen, we see a drawing from Nate, one of the aforementioned twins,
Whoa.
depicting a large black shape and someone in a red hood. This drawing is probably not good. While
No, it's
exploring the
not.
house, we find another note from Cindy Martin.
I don't feel safe in my own home anymore. I hear voices outside around the house at night. I don't let the twins go out in the woods to play because I'm afraid of what's out there. The house itself feels stressed, distorted, slanted somehow. It's like I'm walking through a carnival funhouse. Amy's condition has only gotten worse. I can't stand to be around her and I don't know why. She just doesn't seem like herself anymore. I want to take her to the doctor.
She's getting possessed. They're inciting a demon into her brain.
But I can't leave the boys
To her
here.
soul.
I find that the phone stops working throughout the day, and now I can't seem to find my car keys. Thank God Bob comes home tomorrow.
Oh no.
It's likely that this condition Cindy was referring to is the demonic possession of Amy.
Yeah.
Even if at the time, Cindy didn't realize it. We can also find the third note about that night 1 year ago from John Ward.
I guess I was the only one who thought to check in the attic. When I got up there, it was freezing cold. I found Amy standing in the back, looking straight at me like when I first met her downstairs. We spoke briefly, although it was frustrating to talk to her, or it. I experienced a bit of deception from the demon. During our conversation, she uttered my mother's first name and in other instances spoke perfect Latin. I called for help from the others, but nobody came. So I raised my crucifix and began the rite again.
So 1 year ago, during the course of this exorcism with Father Alred,
I respect it. He's like, hey, come help me. Ain't nobody, or I'm doing this myself then, you know? If I'm gonna be stuck here with you, I might as well make it a problem for both of us.
John was alone with the demon possessing Amy in the attic of the house. After the demon mocked him with the name of his own mother, John began an exorcism of the demon. There's a few other strange things that we can notice while wandering around the house.
Go ahead.
For one, there's a random chance that upon entering the living room, a gray figure can be seen standing next to the outside window. When we walk up to the window, the gray figure runs, disappearing off the left side of the screen. So it seems that for some reason, someone is watching John as he ventures back to the Martin household. And also, when John walks up to the mirror in the master bedroom, we see that some figure is right behind him. While you may mistake it for a shadow at first, it clearly does not match the same shape or image of John himself. In the upstairs part of the house, we see two rooms that appear to be the rooms of the 6-year-old Nate and Jason, as well as Amy's bedroom. In Amy's bedroom, there's a doll on the dresser that, when exorcised, drops the 5th note from Cindy Martin.
Bob must be stationed somewhere in the Middle East because he sent over this weird-looking doll for Amy's birthday. I'll ask Anish about it next time we have book club. She looks like she could be from over there. Amy didn't seem excited to see the doll. I think she would rather have a phone instead. Or maybe seeing a baby doll makes her feel self-conscious about working at the clinic.
So for one, just so it doesn't muddy the waters any, I'll go ahead and cue you all in. The whole mention of the doll being possessed or maybe the cause of some of this is entirely a red herring. There are a few things, like I said earlier, the mentions of gravestones and stuff like that.
I think, well, I mean, just because we saw that, I think the doll is completely irrelevant. He didn't have to tell me. I just think that because we saw that thing that looked like a cult member, the chanting outside of the house, all of that, just, it seems different. It wouldn't make sense if the doll came in out of nowhere now and was the cause of all this problem, you know? It makes sense that it's not the cause of the possession.
Come up in chapter 1 that either never went anywhere or were purposeful misdirection, and this was one of them. Erdorf included the idea of the doll to get people looking the wrong direction. It's also a funny excuse to make a haha joke about Cindy Martin being your stereotypical wine mom from the 1980s because she knows someone named Anish and immediately assumes that she could, quote, be from over there. But what we do have that's relevant to the story's lore is another mention of Amy working at a clinic that a baby doll may make her self-conscious of. You may know where this is going, but it's actually not where you think it's going. It's close to where you think it's going, but not exactly. As we travel to the basement of the house, we find another letter from John Ward, again filling in more of the gaps of what happened a year ago in this house.
Amy's parents could not endure witnessing the proceedings of the rite for long. Mrs. Martin was hysterical, and the thing that was inside Amy was feeding off of the fear. Father Alred asked me to take the Martins upstairs. I was physically worn out, but managed to get them back up the stairs into the kitchen. Amy was screaming, "Mother, Mother," the whole time. Finally, I got them to sit down with me at the kitchen table. After a few minutes, we couldn't hear much of anything down in the basement, so I went down to check on things. I found Father Alred lying on his back, unconscious, with his arms spread out wide.
The priest failed. No.
Amy was not in the chair.
So at some point, Amy broke free during the exorcism and seemingly attacked Father Alred. As we traveled to the location in the basement where this exorcism likely took place,
is that his
we
blood?
can see the markings of an upside-down cross. If we step into the cross, the music begins to distort as these red symbols appear on the ground behind us, getting closer and closer. And when they make their way to us,
Oh, you're gonna get jump scare. Jump scare. Where's the jump scare? There it is. Oh, it's her.
She is here.
Before we once again take control of John, now in Amy's room, with John remarking that Amy is still here. One thing I want to mention now that I haven't brought up yet is the art form of some of these cutscenes. You saw it earlier when I showed the animation of what happens if the rake thing kills John whenever he's outside in the forest. But we see the same art style here when Amy rises from the foot of the bed. It's a very visually unique art style because it's clearly done in sort of the rendering capabilities of the platform we're using. It seems to be in an old graphic fidelity. But the movements are much too smooth, and a lot of the line work far too detailed for something that the Atari 2600 could pull off. To pull off these effects, Erdorf used a technique called rotoscoping. For those that don't know what rotoscoping
that makes sense.
It is when you take a real IRL visual video of someone moving or of some motion or something similar, and then you trace over it effectively or sketch it into whatever media you're using. Rotoscoping was popular with a lot of early hand-drawn animations. So what Erdorf has done here is he has hand-drawn all of these videos depicting the motion that he wants to put in the game, and then the drawn art form he's used has matched the aesthetics of this 8-bit video game. The final product are these incredibly impressive shots that really get across a lot of the horror that's implied throughout the games. One of my favorite aspects about rotoscoping is how seamlessly it allows someone to integrate body horror or supernatural horror into real-world settings. For example, if you wanted to rotoscope, say, someone's head exploding, not that we're going to see that later in the series, hint hint, then all you have to do is get a video of someone doing the motion that you want, and then as you draw that motion, you just have to change the parts of the body or of the individual or of the setting that you want to change. And then all you have to do is blend in the effects that you want to change with the real framework that you've established, and you get these seamless fluid motions of real people and, real motions that are affected by things that would be near impossible to replicate otherwise. You may not know what I'm talking about yet, but we'll get there. Erdorf pulled off some really cool stuff with the rotoscoping. Back to the game, as John moves from room to room, these symbols will appear again and get closer to him. When John holds up his cross, Amy will appear in 4 different versions in all directions of him. This is our first sort of boss fight, with the
purple guy is going crazy.
The objective being, we have to figure out which of these Amy's is the real Amy and hold the cross up to it, or we die. Another thing I forgot to mention, well, didn't really forget, but it wasn't relevant until now. Every single attack in the game, except for attacks in the last 2 boss fights of the game, every single attack instant kills John.
Yeah. One shot.
Anything he runs into, if it touches him, he's dead. He is very afraid of everything and fragile all the time. So you have to be careful with him.
It's demons though, let's be honest. I don't think that's something we should blame him for.
Player moves to a different room of the house, this attack will reset. Eventually, John will remark that he heard a door open upstairs, and the attacks will cease. Meaning it is now time for John to travel back to the attic.
Yeah.
An attic that we have not seen yet, but from the notes, we know that John certainly has. As we make our way up to the attic, we find the final note from John Ward's journey here 1 year ago.
Molly, the church might contact you in a few days to tell you their version of what happened to me. I want you to hear it from me first. A year ago, I was involved in the exorcism of Amy Martin. What they said in the papers about what happened isn't true. She, my superior, father, when I confronted her, she managed to cut the power to the house and her own parents with their own. I have to go back to that house. The nightmares I'm having are real. She's still there waiting for me. I can still help her. If I don't come back, know that I love you and I'm sorry. John.
Kill everybody.
So even though we don't know all of the specifics, we know that something terrible happened in that house. And now John is telling Molly, whoever that might be, that he has to go back, which leads us to the events of September the 21st, 1987 that we're playing right now. Upon stepping into the attic, John confronts Amy Martin.
My God, what happened to you? Do you think my face is pretty?
A little makeup.
I have to finish what I started. She's my priest.
Somehow, there seems to be, I don't know what magic Airdorf pulled, but somehow there seems to be a level of emotion to the text-to-speech. Maybe I'm just superimposing what I think the characters mean onto it. But there's something so unsettling about the way they say everything, to like the tone it's conveyed. I'm sure there was some magic pull, but like the text-to-speech works really well for a lot of the dialogue in the game. As John begins the exorcism, eventually Amy's mask slips off.
Oh,
and we see
that
what
is
Amy meant when she
creepy.
remarked that her face is pretty. Where her face should be, instead, is a giant bloody hole. Her entire face removed by some unknown means. At this point, the boss fight really begins, with Amy once again teleporting around the player as John has to hold his cross on her to perform the exorcism. After this stage of the boss fight ends, from that bloody hole in Amy's face, an arm rips out. As this stage of the boss fight begins, and with an arm hanging out of her face, Amy begins to trace a pentagram on the floor in an attempt to kill John. And as mentioned earlier, if John is touched by any of this, he's dead. Also during this time, Amy will cause other demons to appear and make a run towards John. If John...
Chat, no! Bad chat! If there's a hole, there's a goal. Bad chat. Bad. Bad. We're not face fucking the ghosts. Bad chat.
John is able to defeat Amy. The hand will retract from her face, and Amy, in defeat, will fly out of the window. Having seemingly won, if John leaves the attic, he will find another note on his way out. This note is written in a very strange tone with several redactions from a figure John has yet to encounter.
This is the ceremony for opening the Let no brother or sister utter it.
Is this the I wasn't talking. Holy goalie, shut the fuck. Stop. I'm saying, is this an internet historian talking here? Am I tweaking, or is this an internet historian?
Prepare the Use the right index finger to draw the signs of the
That sounds like an internet historian. Am I wrong there?
On the floor. Bring an impure vessel to the signs of the Let a brother or sister drink at each sign of the Carve the face of the blood that fills the opening is the new. Let 7 be taken from their mothers and lowered into the Upon the offering of the 7th, the will emerge from the This is the second death.
John tries to leave the house, but when he enters the living room,
there's a gun.
Scrawled across the floor in blood is the words, "Kill her." And next to the words are a gun lying on the floor. Also, earlier in the video, I lied. When I said that the only time John put down his cross was to pick up a camera, I was
wasn't
wrong,
a camera.
Because here,
it was a gun.
Cross to pick up a gun. Also, airsoft, YouTube, whatever. Now, upon picking up the gun, we enter the end of Chapter 1. Chapter 1 has 5 possible endings and even a hidden boss fight. Now, of course, only one of these endings are canon, but even the non-canon endings give us some explanations to the lore and world of Faith as a whole. So before we get into the real ending, let's talk about some of those side missions.
Sure.
After you walk out of the Martin house while holding the gun, there are 5 different things you can do. While exploring the woods earlier in the game, the player could run across a deer that would roam from area to area.
Right.
The creature that would crawl around and chase John would even change its attention to the deer on occasion. If you find that deer now that you have the gun and shoot it, you get an ending called The Hunter. In this ending, when John tries to leave the property, the deer cause him to get into a car crash, and then as John crawls away from the wreckage, the deer beat him to death. Each ending gives the player a unique note.
Huh? Damn, bro, what kind of things are they feeding the deer over there? They jumped him. One took the hit, and the others finished the job. What kind of deers do they have over there? What the hell? Well, I wasn't talking holy goalie. Yeah, but yeah. Bro was on autopilot watching this. What do you mean on autopilot? I'm trying to not talk over his points, you know? I gotta actually, I'm enjoying this. I don't think holier than a gun is a cross. I mean, a cross is a gun. Yeah, true. Especially if you bask the bullets in holy water. It's the best delivering. It's the fastest holy water delivering system. If you think about it, typical deer behavior. Maybe. Family Guy skit really is. Yeah, that's not wrong. Family Guy spit. It's a beautiful ending. No, it's not.
And this note describes how the police found John's body having been horribly mangled by a deer. Again, these aren't canon at all, but they are fun. In another ending called The Offering, John finds the sacrificed animal that appears to be a fox that he saw on his way into the Martin house. Yeah. If he shoots the sacrifice with his gun and then decides to leave, he's stopped by a group of people in red robes standing in the middle of the road. In this in-game note, we see again text that is displayed in red, like the redacted note about the second death that we saw earlier. However, this letter is written to Amy, and whoever is writing the letter says that they're sad that Amy can no longer work at the clinic, but they don't want her to feel left out. After inviting her to a party at the clinic, they address the letter as being from Gary. Now, Gary's familiar because if you'll remember when the game boots up, we see the message, "Gary loves you," displayed over and over.
Right.
Once again, this ending of the game is not canon, but Gary and the cult we saw standing on the side of the road certainly will be. I also don't think or hope that any aspect of the deer ending's canon. I hope the deer can't just do that. But certain elements in this ending, like Gary and the people in the red robes, are legitimate. In our third false ending, when we leave the house, we can actually find Amy waiting in the tree line. If we shoot Amy with the gun, she simply falls over dead. And as John tries to leave the property, he is stopped by the police. In this ending, we see that John was arrested for the murder of Amy Martin, John even being blamed for her whole face missing. The element from this note that does give us context to the whole game is that at the end of the note, the police report says that the Vatican confirms that John Ward is not a priest. But that doesn't make any sense. We know that previously he went to perform an exorcism with Father Alred, but then again at the beginning of the whole game, he said that what he's about to do has not been approved by the Vatican. So something has happened to John's priestly status between 1986 and 1987. The fourth ending is when, once again while venturing through the woods, we come across the gray figure that we saw outside of the window earlier. When shooting this man for really no reason, and then getting in the car and driving away, the creature from earlier pops up in the back seat and murders John. This letter is written from the aforementioned Father Garcia. If you'll remember, he is the priest that we heard about in the note that dropped from the creature after exorcising it 10 times. This letter is Father Garcia responding to the cardinal from the first letter. I'm not going to read what that note is now because this note's actually canon in chapter 2 and we'll get to it then. But all you need to know for now is that that gray man that we shot in the middle of the woods is Father Garcia.
Yeah,
and that
Garcia.
creature, the crawling thing that's been chasing us around through the woods this whole time and kills John Ward in this ending, that is Michael Davies. So Father Garcia had been imprisoning Michael Davies for some time, and then Michael Davies seemingly escaped, only to torture John Ward in the woods while Father Garcia was following. And in this ending, we kill Father Garcia, which leaves Michael Davies free to kill John. Now, given that Michael Davies is...
Maybe people should stay out the woods? Well, I mean, it's not like woods are usually, you know, surrounded by demons. I feel like... I don't think that's gonna be the most likely thing to kill you in the woods, you know? I don't think demons was very high on the death list.
This crawling thing with red eyes and red mouth that rips people to pieces, we can assume he's probably possessed and the child doesn't just look like that. So again, we can put some pieces together. Father Garcia was a priest who was imprisoning Michael Davies for some time, and the family demanded him back. And as a matter of fact, the Vatican sided with the family. But Father Garcia, seeing the condition of this boy, knew that would be a bad idea to give him back and continued the exorcism. But now Michael Davies is free, wandering around in the woods, attacking John, and Father Garcia is supposedly there to stop him. So to clarify again, shooting Father Garcia is not canon. But with those 4 false endings out of the way, now we can talk about the real ending. If the player does not follow any of the side routes and heads directly for the car, when John arrives at the car, Michael Davies will run out of the woods and try to attack him. When John shoots Michael, he begins to bleed and stumble out into the road, only to be hit by the Airdorf tractor trailer. See, I told you that 18-wheeler was going to come into play. In the note we get in this ending, it says that the local police are baffled over the remains of this chupacabra. Or at least that's what the locals are referring to, a creature that was ran over by a truck on Snake Meadow Hill Road. And of course we know this chupacabra to be Michael Davies. Then as John drives away, this time uninterrupted, he recites the 91st Psalms and then remarks that while he can't explain what happened in that house, he just has to have faith that he did the right thing. So in our canon ending, after Amy is exorcised in that boss fight, she flies out the window and is seemingly just out there somewhere. In John's confrontation, Michael is killed after being shot and then hit by a truck, and Father Garcia is also alive out there somewhere. At the end of chapter 1, John seems to be in a point of uncertainty. He came back to this house because he wasn't able to live with the tragedy that took place a year ago. But now, after trying to save Amy and exorcise the demon from her, she's gone out there in the night, perhaps even worse than when the night began. And Michael Davies, who John has no idea who that kid is now dead. John says he has to have faith that he did the right thing, but at this point he can't possibly know what that means. But on that note, we have the ending of chapter 1. However, there is one more secret at the ending of chapter 1 that we need to talk about. After John gets the gun, if the player decides to not walk out of the Martin house and instead head towards the mirror in the master bedroom, when John fires his gun at the mirror, a crack will appear in the glass. If John walks back to the living room, picks up a new gun, and does this process 3 times, the glass will shatter and a hand will reach out of the glass and pull John into a sort of mirror realm. While there, John is in a boss fight against this tall, dark creature whose head seems to be a bleeding stump. As John tries to exorcise this creature, it will periodically teleport around the room. After defeating this demon, a new note will drop from it, which is the final note from chapter 1.
October 23rd, 1986. Dear Dr. McGlashan, it has been 30 days since the beginning of my treatment here at Yale Psychiatric
This is actually going to be big.
Dr. Spinell, who has been so patient with me, has helped me understand my afflictions and has helped me find a way to move forward and accept the truth. With Dr. Spinell's help, I have come to accept what really happened in September at the Martin family residence. I accept that what happened was not the result of any supernatural phenomenon, but rather the desperate actions of a young girl driven to violence by her dogmatic parents and old church rituals that are thought to drive out evil. I am happy to report that, since accepting the truth, my nightmares have ceased and I now enjoy peace of mind that I have not felt since the incident. Given my progress since first coming here, I respectfully request my release from Yale Psychiatric Institute, contingent upon follow-up appointments with Dr. Spinell in the future. Sincerely, John Ward.
Now, I know what you may be thinking. You may be thinking, oh, is all of this in John's head? Is John actually in some mental hospital somewhere right now?
I don't think so.
Is this just a pyrocynical video? But I assure you,
I don't think so. Just because Davis is real, right? The kid's real. The police found the carcass. You know, it's real. It's real.
It's not going there. However, this letter will have relevance as to the time period from the first exorcism in 1986 and the exorcism now in 1987. For now, just hold on to that thought about John Ward being in the mental ward. John Ward in the ward.
No, Ward in the ward.
Word.
Word.
The last thing
Word.
from chapter 1 I haven't brought up yet is one more note that can be found in the Martin household. If, while exploring the basement, John exercises the baby crib, a note appears from a missionary named Layton.
Dear Amy, thanks for writing. It really brightened my day hearing from you. In your letter, you asked what's the weirdest thing I've seen as a missionary. The area we are working in has a lot of folks who practice Quimbamba.
Quimbamba.
It's what you might call a pagan religion. It's kind of a mix of Catholic and African religions. One of the saints they worship is Saint La Muerta, or Saint Death. Yesterday, we talked to a boy about 15. When we asked him if he had ever prayed, he said, "No, but I have prayed to San La Muerta." He told us about a time when he stayed over at his cousin's house and, according to him, they prayed to some figures of San La Muerta and the figures made things in the house move around. He got real quiet and scared looking after that. We told him he could pray to God and that God wouldn't make him feel scared like that. We invited him to church, but he hasn't come yet. I need to wrap this letter up and get back to work. See you in 4 months. Layton.
Now, similar to the doll mentioned earlier and stuff like the gravestones and whatnot,
maybe.
This doesn't hold any relevance to the main game's narrative.
Come on. Then we're going to have some more diverse, things here. But okay.
However, what it does hold relevance to is its relation to Erdorf, the game's creator. As Erdorf talked about in the interview that we did, not to keep plugging the interview, but it was fun. But as Erdorf mentioned in our interview, not only is he a Christian, as you could probably figure out from a lot of the themes in this game, but he was also a missionary. And this letter from Layton, as shown in game, was almost one for one a letter that he wrote back home during his mission trip. He says that he inserted it into the game to give the world a sense of depth, especially when it comes to religion and occult practices. And he also made up Quimbamba because he didn't want to implicate any real world beliefs. But I just thought it was interesting and wanted to mention that the creator took his letter, changed the name from Erdorf to Layton, threw it in a game about demons, and it fit, which is terrifying. Erdorf actually does a lot of stuff like that in the Unholy Trinity. Not only does he do things like use one of his letters for in-game lore, or use a lot of the themes that were built off of the satanic panic from the 80s, and then convert those into the horror in the game, or effectively the boogeyman. A lot of people thought, cults might be, or all these secret cults that worship the devil that are around in town and stuff like that. Not only is that used literally in the game, but even in a lot of the thematic elements. Like, for example, at one point in the game, there are these very creepy noises. Like in the music, it's very screamy loud. And they are edited versions from a real world exorcism. He has never said which exorcism it is, but if you're like me and you're weird and you look into exorcist stuff or creepy horror stuff like that, you can probably think what the most famous exorcist audio tapes are, like real exorcist audio tapes. And those are, I believe, the ones he used to make the music for this. So while playing the game, not only are you exposed to, thematic elements of occult demonic practices and, seeing all of this scary writings he had that were real, that are translated into the game, but you're also listening to demons or potential demons as well. So that's
not concerning. Nice. Yeah, it's not concerning.
I guess I'm sorry. I want to emphasize how terrible and how brutal this world is with all of the horror that is being built up to contrast with where this story eventually goes. But now that is everything from Faith Chapter 1, so now let's move in to Chapter 2. Now, Chapter 2 has a prologue attached to it, but the prologue doesn't make a lot of sense until you play the chapter itself. So we're going to cover Chapter 2 and then go back to the prologue.
Okay.
Which makes sense because in-game, you don't unlock the prologue until you play the chapter itself. Chapter 2 opens with us playing as a gray figure in a small room. This character,
person.
who you'll recognize from Chapter 1,
character.
is Father Garcia. When you start playing as Father Garcia, you can pick up the same note from Chapter 1 that tells us about the Cardinal trying to make Father Garcia return Michael Davies home to his parents. Walking through Garcia's house, we see pictures of Michael Davies in the later stages of his possession. And when stepping into the basement, we see Michael Davies chained to a bed surrounded by crosses. When Father Garcia
I wonder what's possessing Davis. Should we make this vid a parter? Probably. Yeah, we should probably do that. Do I want to stop it in part 1? There's still quite a lot of the video to go through. I don't know if I want to make this a 4-parter. We're going to get a little bit farther. We'll make it a 3-parter. Maybe a 2-parter.
approaches, the demon initially speaks in the voice of Michael asking to be let go, before reverting to his demonic voice and saying that the priest will never win. As Garcia holds up his cross and begins the exorcism, the demon begins to thrash before suddenly the power goes out. When the power comes back on, we glimpse Michael quickly running up the staircase. Father Garcia chases him out of his room and into the hallway of the apartment building, where the possessed Michael Davies has murdered and is now feasting on a dead tenant. Garcia asks Michael what he's done before Michael says once again, "I have the body of a pig," and jumps out the window, running away. Father Garcia then quickly follows after him. Mind you, in a very funny running animation. So in case it isn't already apparent, what we just witnessed is a prequel to the events of Chapter 1. In Chapter 1, we know that somehow Father Garcia got to the point that he was chasing Michael Davies around the woods, only for Michael to get shot by John and then ran over by a truck. What we just witnessed was the amount of time leading up to that event. Michael Davies was in the possession of Father Garcia for some time, as Father Garcia was trying to exorcise the demon from him. Eventually, the demon broke loose, and then the events of Chapter 1 take place. So for some reason, whatever demon was possessing Michael decided to escape and then run to the forest outside of the Martin household, only to inevitably meet its end, or at least the end of the body it was possessing, in front of John Ward. So that raises the question, what was the demon inside of Michael doing at the Martin household in the first place?
Is it related to the other demon?
What is Father Garcia doing now, since the boy he was trying to save is in several pieces all over a Connecticut back road? But on the bright side, probably not possessed. The note that I didn't mention...
I mean, he's cosplaying as Roadkill, but I don't think the demon wants to possess chunks of meat. You know, getting hit by a semi is no joke. Right? Don't go into those woods. It's full of deer. Honestly, the deer is the scarier part. Because all the demons, they're demons, right? But deer got together and planned a way to cause a car accident and then beat a human to death. It's more scary than the idea of demons, you know? Deer free food. They killed the man. The demons
and one of the non-canonical endings of Chapter 1, specifically the one where you kill Father Garcia, is a note from Garcia responding to Cardinal Gifford, in which Garcia tells Cardinal Gifford that he cannot return Michael to the Davies family because Michael is in no condition to be returned. And to prove the dire straits that Michael is currently in, Garcia says that he will attach several photographs of Michael as proof of his possession. These are likely the photographs we saw lying around Father Garcia's home. So it seems that, given that this note is what's found after you kill Garcia in Chapter 1, Garcia was never able to get this letter or these photographs out because he was interrupted by Michael's escape. There is one more little thing of note at this little section at the beginning of Chapter 2. So there is a mention in... I think it's the one already seen in Chapter 2, but in one of the mental health reports we see for John Ward, it's mentioned that he is afraid of clowns, that he has a phobia of them. And when you're playing as Father Garcia, if you go into his closet in his bedroom and you walk just off screen, you'll pick up a clown nose and put it in your inventory. This led to a bunch of theories that Garcia was actually a villain, that he was planning to attack or mess with John in some way. But after talking to Erdorf, he confirmed that this was set up for a side sort of Easter egg in Chapter 3 that ended up not going anywhere. So, for now, while playing as a priest whose little demon boy just escaped into the woods, you can pick up a clown nose for whatever that's worth. After this scene with Father Garcia, we pick back up playing as John Ward, who, for some reason, is once again in the middle of a forest. You think after the events of Chapter 1 he'd learn to stay out of it, but I guess not. While walking through the woods, we immediately realize that things are not good, as John comes across the remains of a deer.
Oh god, the deer and demons have beef. You know what? Maybe deers are demons' natural arch enemy in this universe, you know? They're the forces that fight each other. This is not angel and demons here. This is deer and demons, you know? The double D. The double D, what a conundrum. They've been doing this for thousands of years. I was gonna say, does he have his crucifix on him? I think he was gonna need it.
Scattered and dismembered across a large tree. Another thing that the player will note, if they do what I did upon seeing this and immediately try to point Jesus at it, is that, for some reason, Father Ward's cross is now silver. So now the crucifix has gone from gold to silver. We don't know what to do with that information yet, but keep it in mind. Eventually we come to a large gateway, and in front of the gateway, we find an ominous note.
I shook hands with the devil. I looked him in the eye. He looked like a long-lost friend.
After stepping through this entryway, John will find himself in an old cemetery. There's a note explaining that this tomb is a tomb for the Save family, but the tomb functions as a safe room as you navigate the cemetery itself. And if it wasn't apparent enough from the deer that we saw scattered on the tree outside, or the ominous notes in front of the cemetery, we immediately realize that things are not good when stepping into the Save family tomb and seeing 3 people coated in red sitting inside of it. When walking up to each of these people, we can see their expressions of anger and discontent. Something is certainly off about them, and we see what that is once we step to a mirror at the end of the tomb itself. When John faces the mirror, he sees an eerie reflection of himself smiling at him. We see the reflection of John holding a key before we're pulled back and we see the souls of the people sitting inside of the tomb get up and fly to separate parts of the cemetery. From here, the player can deal with each of the 3 souls in any order they choose.
We have to go collect
if we make our way to the bottom left of the cemetery, we're met with a small boss fight. This creature moves quickly from clouds of fog floating through the cemetery, and the only way to attack him is to wait for him to hide within one of these clouds and try to exorcise him before he teleports away to another. And as always, if John is even touched by the hint of this ghost, he's dead immediately. When we finally defeat this ghost or demon or whatever it is, it drops a note. However, the note probably isn't what you were expecting.
Losing Grandpa was the hardest thing I ever experienced. We were really close. I cried about it for weeks. Then my stepmom introduced me to some of her friends. They asked me, "Would you like to see your grandfather again?" I missed him so much, I was willing to try anything. That night, my stepmom drove me to one of her friends' house. They took me down to the basement. I saw my grandfather in there, only it wasn't actually him. When I tried to run, they closed the basement door and locked me in. I can't remember much else from that night. My stepmom's friends are always coming by the house now. They tell me I have a debt to pay. They say they have work for me to do.
So why would this demon thing we just fought drop a note about a young boy who missed his grandfather? Well, before
No. No, chat. No. Bad Respirin. Bad. Bad.
we have time to think about that, we're on to the next fight. At the top left-hand corner of the cemetery, there's a short puzzle we have to figure out by moving from one of the walkthrough areas of this 4-section courtyard into the correct next area.
That is
this
a
puzzle
demon
can
right
be solved by going to the room before it and then looking at which way the statue's hands are pointing. Once we solve the puzzle, we trigger yet again another boss fight. This ghost is much more violent than the previous one. As a matter of fact, the previous ghost didn't really seem to have any direct attacks. Instead, it just moved from cloud to cloud and supposedly killed John on accident when John was in the way. This one, however, makes a beeline for John, but because it's so exposed, is pretty easy to put down. Once again, when this ghost is defeated, it drops another note.
I've been freed. No more overbearing father-turned-violent alcoholic. No more hiding my bruises and cuts. No more pills and needles. No more getting laughed at and kicked around. They'll never laugh at me again. By day, my body withers away, but by night, my mind explores forbidden worlds of power and knowledge, guided by beings of pure darkness. I have been trusted with secret knowledge of the demon seal. I have learned the correct conjuring sign, drawing the inverted star along the rocks arranged in 5, first at the top left point and then down. I will lure them into the woods. Then I will show them my power.
Now this note sounds
That sounds ominous and bad for everybody involved.
a whole lot more like a demon, right?
Yeah.
But again, why is that paired with the one that we heard earlier? But before we can think about that, we're on to the last boss fight of the
Well, it's not sounds like a demon, really. It just sounds like somebody that's had a bad life and wants revenge, and instead of taking the good old AR to school, is doing the more unholy approach to dealing with his problems in the wrong way.
cemetery. By now going to the right-hand side of the cemetery, we find ourselves in a small sort of maze. While walking the path to unlock the doorway, we come across another note. This note giving us a bit more context as to the events surrounding Chapter 1.
It is with great sadness that the Sterling community announces the passing of Cindy Marie Martin, 38, and Robert Kimball Martin, 40. Devoted husband and wife and beloved parents. Their lives tragically came to an end on September the 21st due to an accident in their home. Bob was a training advisor for the United States Navy, and Cindy was a CPA and, more recently, a stay-at-home mother. They were married March the 12th of 1969 in Voluntown. Though not particularly religious, they taught their children to be kind, generous, and involved in the community. A public, closed-casket memorial will be held at Tillinghast Funeral Home at 10 a.m. Thursday.
Very interesting. I wonder how
Burial
mangled
services will proceed shortly after.
their corpses
Bob
got.
and Cindy are survived by
that's
their
the
daughter,
case.
Amy, and twin boys, Nate and Jason.
So if you were curious as to how in Chapter 1 John just lets himself into the Martin household a year after the first exorcism and wonder why Bob and Cindy don't have anything to say about that, that's because Bob and Cindy no longer exist.
Yeah.
You could probably piece that together given the redacted note that John left Molly in Chapter 1. But even from the descriptions we see in this newspaper article, their death sounds pretty brutal. I mean, it had to be a closed casket after all.
Yeah.
But no time to dwell on that because we've got another demon ghost soul thing to go fight. And when we get to that fight, we're treated to this sight.
The hands again.
This boss fight is kind of a combination of the previous two. While it does move towards us, albeit
He's got his cock out! Sorry, I had to. I had to say it.
slower, the majority of its attacks revolve it moving across the screen in a set direction, not specifically chasing down John. As long as you can stay out of the way of its attack patterns, you're fine.
Whoa.
And upon exercising this ghost, we get our last note from the cemetery.
Nobody was thrilled when I got pregnant. Not even a little happy. Even my doctor seemed to be judging me. Each time I'd leave the doctor's office, I'd see this strange woman across the street. All she'd do is stare at me and smile. No words, just a big, warm smile. Somehow, it made those visits a little more bearable. After I lost the baby, I saw her again across the street from the doctor's.
That's unfortunate.
Her smile was as big as ever, but somehow not as warm and friendly as I remember. Yesterday, I was walking and was shocked to see the woman standing in the middle of the path. Now, she was pregnant. She beckoned towards me. I followed her off the path into the woods. That's when I met Gary.
Why would you follow this random lady into the woods? Why? That makes no sense. Why would you follow this random person to the woods? And then you meet Gary. Gary loves you.
So now that we have 3 different examples, we can probably figure out what these ghosts that we've been fighting really are. If it hasn't already been made clear, there is some kind of cult associated with whatever demonic presence is happening in this town.
Very
Again,
clear.
in one of the bad
Very
endings from chapter
clear
1, we
indeed.
see the cult outright. And even though that ending isn't canon, their influence in the area certainly is. Things like the sacrificed animal that we've seen in both chapters. And now these 3 red figures that we found in the Save family tomb. And especially the mention at the end of that last note of a man named Gary. We've heard Gary mentioned multiple times at this point, all in relation to whatever this cult is.
Yep.
So it seems from these notes that Gary and his converts, given the note from the young boy who we first fought in the tombs, have been leading people in with promises of seeing their dead loved ones, of good fortune and power, and this has caused individuals to fully commit themselves over to demonic spirits. I mean, we just saw what happened to the souls or bodies of people who were a part of this cult for some time. It seems that this cult has a greater reach beyond just what happened to Amy Martin. John makes his way back to the Save family tomb, and on approaching the mirror again, this time his reflection takes that key and jams it into his own eye. John, now in the real world with his eye bleeding and a key inside of it, stumbles his way out of the tomb and heads to the gate at the top of the cemetery, all the while leaving a trail of blood behind him. Now, supposedly pulling the key out of his skull, John opens the gate and is led again into a sort of wooded area. But
That's a crazy way to lose your eye.
upon entering
I'd be mad.
this wooded area, this happens.
The trees are speaking monster now. What the hell is that? What the trees? The trees are alive. The trees are alive.
The first time I played this game, which was live on the second channel, which second channel live streams, by the way, link in the description. But when I was playing this game, it horrified me. I wanted to quit right there. I did not want to run into whatever that thing is again. And for the rest of the game, I exercised every tree I came across because I was taking no chances.
There ain't no way.
Eventually, John makes his way to an old abandoned church just above the cemetery. Walking up to the church, John finds a very ominous note.
She guards the door to underground purgatory.
Okay, all right. Internet historian, get out of here. Get out of here with you. She guards the door to underground purgatory. I have not seen her children fear her. As voice.
Eye hath not seen her. Children fear her.
Well, no time to think about what that might mean yet.
Hilarious.
So if we explore the
Absolutely
outside of the
hilarious.
church, we'll find that the church itself is surrounded by a large cornfield. Walking into the cornfield, John can exercise a scarecrow, which reveals this note. I had to come back. I had to walk through the corn one last time. I wasn't sure what I would find. The dogs, the children, the thing that took them. It had been 5 years. I couldn't even find the little graves anymore. I just walked in the field until I found that stupid grinning scarecrow. As I listened to the night wind blowing through the crops, it was like the scarecrow was mocking me. I turned around to go back, and that's when I heard it behind me. Well, it was more like I felt it. I didn't dare turn around. We just stood there. Me, the scarecrow, and the doomed child. Finally, I mustered up a tiny bit of courage and turned to look. It immediately fled in the opposite direction, crashing through the rows of corn. I ran too. What little I saw of it drained the blood from my face and made my skin crawl. I say it because whatever I was looking at
Didn't have a face, just a bloody gaping
Just
hole.
a bloody,
oh my god,
gaping
just
hole.
like the last
This
one.
immediately reminds us of Amy Martin, right?
Yeah.
Because when's the other time that we've seen something with a giant hole for a face? Another detail is that while walking through the cornfields, John will often spot a small purple child quickly moving just off screen. We don't have enough information to know yet if this is the child that maybe the note was referring to,
Okay.
or maybe this child is related to the creature with a hole for a face, or maybe it's just a young William Afton. Upon stepping into the foyer
Hey, even he can't deny it. Young William Afton.
of the church, we find a note laying on the floor. Day one of our paranormal investigation
I didn't
into the
stretch.
old
I'll
Snake
do that right
Meadow
now. Give me a
Hill
minute.
Church. We've got 3 cameras, a box of tapes, and enough beer and beef jerky to last us a week. On our way in, we asked some of the locals about the church.
It was mostly the stories we had heard before, evil spirits dragging children into the cornfield and secret tunnels under the chapel. But there was this spindly lady game that we hadn't heard yet. Apparently, it has to do with summoning the spirit of a woman who used to take care of the orphans back in the 50s. There's even an old rhyme they told us. Walk the church from room to room, and maybe you will see her. She will move when you do, but never try to trick her. Awesome. We're going to try the game tonight as soon as we get settled in.
Oh, God.
So first of all, this church is called the Snake Meadow Hill Church. That should be familiar because the house that the Martins lived at was on Snake Meadow Hill Road. So likely, the Martin household and this church are somehow connected, at least geographically. The other thing is this detail of the spindly lady game. In every room of the church, there are a series of candles laid out on the ground. After some guesswork, the player will eventually realize that the candles line up with the rooms of the church itself. One candle representing the player, one candle representing something else. If the two candles become one lit candle, that means you are currently in the room with whatever this creature is. By checking different areas of the room by holding up your cross, eventually, the spindly lady will appear. This is again another boss fight, and when defeated, the spindly lady won't respawn. Once we find the spindly lady, she'll begin an attack pattern where she teleports away from the player and then flies at them. Compared to the fights we've had up until now, it's pretty tough, but once we finally defeat her, the door to the basement will be opened in the main auditorium of the church. Now I know that those of you who know the game know that I'm skipping a lot of Chapter 2 and the church right now, but right now we're just looking at all the canonical main stuff. Once we figure out the nature of Chapter 2 itself, I'll go back and talk about the exploration stuff. As we walk down the stairs into the basement, we find a note written by someone named Father Clark.
You saw that purple
This
guy,
is my
right?
final memoir, hastily scribbled on a page of the good book. I now descend the staircase, knowing full well that she waits for me ahead. Checking my old watch has revealed something quite astonishing. Time doesn't change down here as we know it on the surface. Even now, the hands don't move past 2 o'clock. God's work be done, I have been to where only the faintest light shine and protect from things unspeakable. God help me, Father Clark, a foolish old man, going mad in this dark prison, ears bleeding from the screams of a demon.
So here we see that Father Clark, who was supposedly a previous priest at this church, fell victim to whatever creature was inhabiting it. There is a sort of clock face laying on the ground in the next room. And then when stepping into the room after that, we see that the room is completely dark other than a series of symbols laid out on the floor. The symbols correlate to the clock in the previous room, and what we're supposed to do is trace the clock around its sides to figure out the correct path to take to get to the other side. If John doesn't step on the symbols in the correct order, then all of the symbols will disappear as a sort of timer begins to play, and John has to run back to the start of the room. And when he gets there, he sees exactly what was chasing him. Now, we have no idea what this creature is yet. We will soon. But whatever it is, it's big and frightening. Once we finally do get to the other side, we're led into another room that has these sort of gray effigies all around it.
I think that's bodies.
Mother of Demons scrawled into the floor. After walking back up the stairs, we find ourselves once again
it's Deer
in the middle
Gang.
of the woods.
It's Deer Gang.
However, this time, laying in a circle of rocks, we find a very special note.
3 murdered in latest
the deers killed them. The deers killed them.
wave of ritualistic killings, Sterling, Connecticut. The bodies of 3 young people were discovered in the
The
woods.
deer gang violence is going too crazy. This is a good town. Got thrown down. Ow! Coffee? No coffee today, alright? I'm gonna drink. I got lemonade, you know?
Outside of Sterling last night, in what authorities are calling a ritualistic murder. Sandra Atwood, Angel Nogles, and Troy Ingalls are the names of the unfortunate victims who were apparently stabbed multiple times and beheaded before being killed in a paganistic ritual. Pandemonium regnat. 2 of the victims' bodies were only partially burned, although authorities would not specify who.
Okay.
The bodies were found several miles from Gallup Cemetery, where residents reported a tomb had been desecrated. They also found trails of blood leading off into the woods. Investigators would not comment on whether or not these two incidents could be related. The arrangement of the bodies in a ritualistic pattern, as well as the writing of certain symbols in blood, matches the style of several murders that have occurred in the Sterling area since 1986. The killings may be connected to last week's brutal slaying of Amy Martin, a 17-year-old girl, by John Ward. Ward had impersonated a priest to gain Amy's trust before luring her into the woods and killing her. Investigators are asking residents to report any suspicious activity to the police. Authorities are urging the people of Sterling to not mourn the loss of Atwood, Noglis, and Ingalls because, after all, they were degenerate, devil-worshipping thugs who were hooked on crack cocaine and hated their parents. Why even conduct an investigation at all? That's what you would like them to think, wouldn't you, John? They were just three pathetic outcasts who got what they deserved. You actually did the community a favor when you found them getting high in that tomb. You stalked them through the graves and killed them one by one. You ignored their cries for help, their pleas for mercy. You put holes in their ruined drug addict bodies, and then you chopped off their heads because everybody knows that removing the head is the only way to kill a snake. Well, guess what? You didn't kill the snakes, John. You cannot kill what cannot be killed. Thou shalt not raise up what thou canst not put down again. Thou couldst not kill Amy. Thou shalt not destroy my works, for they are the works of the eternal dragon. Even now she is at thy door. Her hand is at thy throat, yet you see her not. I will have thy soul, for I am the God of this world.
Will have thy soul, for I am the
God
of this world.
I'm sorry, internet historian took me out. It's alright, it's not bad. Oh, cool.
We cut out of the note and fire surrounds us. There's cult members everywhere. Amy is watching us behind a tree just above.
Interesting.
When suddenly John's body begins to dissolve and melt into nothingness until he becomes this deformed spider-like creature crawling about on the floor. Eventually, after wandering around in this state and surrounded by more of these effigies, John makes his way to an underpass. On the bridge above, he sees a man and woman repairing a truck. After passing beneath that bridge, John regains his original form. There's been a lot of weird stuff so far in Chapter 2, and not just your typical, oh, there's demons and he's an exorcist stuff. Like, there's been some reality-breaking sequences. For example, whenever we left the cemetery on our way to the church earlier, John opens a gate and suddenly the whole layout of the cemetery appears right in front of him. And here we saw what looked like John's body melting into nothingness, but now he's fine, priest collar and all. Eventually, we make our way to a drainage tunnel
interesting,
that
but
leads
confusing.
under the road. To give some context to this, we find another note. 2 more bodies have been recovered from the drainage ditch under Snake Meadow Hill Road outside Sterling. The notorious Candy Tunnel, known in the area to be a home to addicts, gangs, runaways, and the indigent, has been the site of several grisly discoveries over the past 3 months. Since May, 5 bodies have been recovered from the drainage ditch leading to the tunnels. Authorities are being pressured by concerned citizens to search the tunnels amid fears of a possible connection to Joe Bowman, aka the Candy Store Killer, who has claimed 8 victims in Connecticut and Rhode Island over the past year.
Nah.
And there certainly was some kind of killer down here, because on stepping into the sewers, we see not only demonic graffiti, but skeletons and bodies littered around everywhere. On exercising some of these skeletons, we can find another note. Multiple officers wounded, found dead in sewer tunnel shootout. Law enforcement officials are reporting multiple officers down, including 1 deputy who was fatally wounded after an exchange of gunfire in the sewer tunnels near Snake Meadow Hill Road, also known as the Candy Tunnel. Witnesses say they heard the shots approximately 10 minutes after police raided the tunnels, where suspected murderer Joe Bowman, aka the Candy Store Killer, was alleged to be hiding. At this time, it is not known how many officers have been wounded, although it has been confirmed that 1 officer has been killed. Officials are not saying if Bowman was wounded in the exchange, and efforts are being made to recover the casualties from the tunnels. As we keep walking through the tunnels, we'll eventually come across trails of blood. Following them, we'll enter a room that has graffiti across 4 different columns that, when pieced together, says, "When you see it, don't move." Keeping this in mind, as we enter the next room, this appears from behind a pillar. As we remain perfectly still, It gets closer as we see it's a creature whose hands are disembodied and constantly rubbing its face. This is a creature known as the Peekaboo Demon, and just as the graffiti suggests, when you see it, don't move. Following where it went, we can come across other notes related to what's happening down in these tunnels. Also, as we move through these tunnels, we'll occasionally see these red figures sprinting from behind the grates of the sewers.
When I was a boy, my Nana used to tell me old legends about the dragons, trolls, and demons that lived up in the mountains of Norway. In those old tales, the people were never strong enough to kill the monster, so instead, they would sacrifice one of their own to appease it, keep it satisfied. It was like a deal with the devil, one sacrifice per year so that the beast would not come down from the mountain and slaughter the entire village in one night.
Damn.
There was no candy store killer. What we're dealing with is not even human. When I got separated from the other officers, I saw the damn thing dragging what was left.
So was the Peekaboo Demon behind all the murder?
Of Jenkins down into its lair. That's when I understood. The bums and the tweakers, the ones with grid and the child prostitute runaways, they'll eventually come back to the tunnels. They always do. It can have them for all I care. Nobody wants them around, except maybe that thing. And I tell you what, I hope to God it never gets tired of them.
Thank you for that, Pat.
So whatever's down here is supposedly feeding on people.
Yeah, it's feeding on
the witnesses are so afraid of it,
humans.
They want it to keep feeding as long as it's not on them. There's another sort of secret note that can be found when traveling just off screen to a hidden corner of the room.
This is as far as I'll go to hide my stash. Nobody goes past the first pipe. Nobody except those strange people with their bodies painted red and their eyes like animals. Twice a month, they come and pass right through into the deeper tunnels. Sometimes I can hear them yelling or chanting. Sometimes I hear something like an old woman laughing. Sometimes I hear things that aren't even human. Whatever they are, they sound really, really big.
Isn't perhaps
as is to be
involving
expected,
with that
this
giant
cult
monster
is
we saw
involved in some
earlier?
way. They're holding rituals and sacrifices, it seems, down in the sewers, and as we've seen from the other notes, innocent people are paying the price.
Yeah.
As we continue to follow the path of blood, it will eventually lead us to a dark room. In the corner of the room is a flashlight, and on picking it up, we can see the carnage across the walls and floor.
Wow.
And at the center of this carnage, John will encounter the basement demon. When meeting him, the demon will say, "Welcome, blasphemer," and another boss fight will begin. This fight is particularly difficult on your first try because you can only see a limited amount of the room in whichever direction you point your flashlight. And again, being touched by the demon in any way kills John. During the fight, however, as John whips his flashlight around the room, he will catch brief glimpses of the same child from earlier, or even two children at a time, sprinting across the room. After a couple phases of attacks, the boss will be defeated, and John is now allowed to leave the area. Using his flashlight, he can now venture into the dark tunnel with cryptic symbols, and at the end of the tunnel, he will see a red figure sprinting away from him. Now, at this point, we've seen these red figures before. Not only have they appeared in glimpses in the background of certain areas, but while walking through the sewers, it's possible to run into them, in which case they needed to be fended off with a cross. These red figures, as described in several of the letters that we've seen earlier, are not demons per se, but are instead cult members.
Yeah.
These low-level cult members are effectively cannon fodder that the cult throws at John to try to stop him. Within the game and community, these members are referred to as thralls. The purpose of these thralls are to serve as a vessel for and to worship the demons, while also trying to stop John Ward. On following the direction this thrall went, we find ourselves in an underground catacomb. The wall's purple and very different from the sewer we've come to know so far. We find a door with the depiction of a goat-headed demon, but are unable to pass as the door is locked. While looking for a way out, we can use our flashlight to look at the ground and see, once again scrawled in blood, the phrase, "They hate the light." Keeping this in mind, we walk into the next room, and we are suddenly attacked by what appears to be high-ranking cult members. Or at least I assume they're high-ranking, considering that the thralls run around naked, painted red, and these guys get to wear clothes. So that's high-ranking in my book.
Yeah,
as these cult members approach us,
analogy.
John shines his light at them to force them into the shadows. Using this technique, John can make his way around the edge of the room, and eventually find a sort of altar with a key lying beneath it. If John walks to the top of this room, he finds a note hidden behind 3 different symbols. These symbols block John's movement, but the note definitely looks like ones we've been able to pick up until this point. So why can't we get to it? More on that later. John then has to make his way back through the room filled with the high-ranking cult members, but as he does, there's a picture of what appears to be a nun at the front of the room. John can even exorcise the picture. Much like the note that we weren't able to get to earlier, more on that in a minute. Now able to unlock the demon's door, John steps through and finds himself in a hallway, now no longer needing the flashlight. But then suddenly, as he walks through the hallway,
there's a nun.
Father Garcia saves John from the demonic nun that was about to attack him. For one, this is super cool. Father Garcia is neat, and then he shows up with the cross, and the nun disappears, and yay, I love it.
How did
but
he get in?
also, that nun is similar to the picture that we saw in the cult members' room earlier. Garcia tells John that he will help him to fight this evil, and the two of them set off. They walk into the room where the symbols on the floor match the symbols that were seen on the floor of the Martin's basement where Amy was exorcised. It seems that the demons are placing this here for John to see and make him feel guilt over the loss of Amy Martin. Garcia assures John that this wasn't his fault and that together they'll defeat this evil. The two of them step into the next room, and when they approach a figure standing in front of an altar of various demons,
I think it is.
Figure turns around to reveal its evil and spitting face. Here it is John's job to protect Garcia as Garcia recites the 91st Psalm. During this time, thralls will rush out of the doorways around the room and attempt to kill Garcia. John has to protect Garcia during this time and can also deal damage to the demon at the center of the room. But it's also completely possible that during this segment, Father Garcia dies. Like straight up, if you don't protect him, a thrall will run over and decimate him. Just like John, he goes down in one hit. Although we're not going to do that because we like Garcia. And while Garcia's death here doesn't affect that much, as we're going to see, in my world, you keep Garcia alive through every phase of the fight. This boss fight has 3 stages. The first is this defense against the thralls. The second goes back to a flashlight, similar to the basement demon fight from earlier. And then in the third stage of the fight, the nun uses combos and moves that we've seen from pretty much every boss fight up until this point. After we finally defeat the nun, her body begins to dissolve, and this giant monstrous being breaks out of her. This is the same monstrous being that we saw in the basement of the church earlier. But just as this is happening, all of a sudden, John wakes up. Yes, I know, the whole thing was a dream. That's so boring and lame and stupid.
Kinda
and
is.
You're fair to have that opinion on first playthrough of like, oh, was any of that even real? Did I just do all of chapter 2 and it was all in Layhead? Again, insert pyrocynical reference. But chapter 2 isn't so much a dream as it is a vision. Sure, John's actions within chapter 2 weren't real, but everything that he was witnessing was. The possessions of the cult members who went to the cemetery is real. All the events that we read about happening at the Snake Meadow Hill Church are real, and especially the things we've learned related to the cult. Effectively, this dream allowed John to learn about what the cult was up to and what their practices are without actually putting his life on the line. This also explains a lot of the weird things we've been seeing throughout chapter 2. Like, again, the children appearing in the background of certain boss fights, to elements of the world appearing and disappearing at whim. So now in John's house, we can walk around to the other side of the bed and pick up the only note in the game that we get from Molly.
John, I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry. I will always love you back. Molly.
So it seems that Molly, again, the woman that John wrote to in chapter 1, seemed to be a romantic interest. But that doesn't make sense. How does a priest have a romantic interest? It's kind of like against the whole point. But again, all will be explained eventually. As John walks to his living room, for one, he passes by a door that's absolutely covered in crosses.
That looks like a do not enter mode, or a door, I mean.
And then in his living room, we can see a letter on John's doormat. When picking up the letter on the doormat, we find a note from Father Garcia.
John,
Garcia contacted him.
The profane Sabbath is almost upon us. If they find Nate and Jason, they will perform a ritual on them to call forth the demon of unspeakable power. The name of the demon is Malthus. I am in the process of discovering their whereabouts. I will contact you again soon.
Team up.
We must not let them do to the boys what they did to Amy. Father Garcia. So even though Garcia and John have never formally met, I mean, they met in the woods outside of the Martin household, but that doesn't count, somehow Garcia knows about John. And he also knows about John's plan to save the twins. He says that Nate and Jason are out there somewhere and that the cult is trying to use them to summon a demon by the name of Malthus. Now, Malthus is an actual biblical demon, or at least in Jewish and Christian lore, a demon that's mentioned outside of the Bible. By means that we're not sure of yet, Garcia is helping John, and the two of them have to find Nate and Jason before it's too late. Chapter 2 ends with a cutscene of John driving away saying that he has to save the twins, before the camera pans back and we see that he's being followed. So whatever John and Garcia set out to do, the cult will be hot on their tracks. Now, Chapter 2 is absolutely full of a lot of different lore and a lot of different alternative endings.
Right,
The lamest one
talk
I'll
about the
mention now,
exploration.
if you get Garcia killed during that end boss fight, his letter to John at the end doesn't even mention Malthus. He's just saying that your soul can still be saved. And the end cutscene of John driving, his dialogue isn't nearly as cool. He's not like, I gotta save the twins. Instead, he's just like, oh, I'm so sad. But in this house, we save Garcia every time, or we quit. That's just how it works. But now that you know how
Yeah.
the mainline story of Chapter 2 goes, let's talk about all of the extra lore and even an alternate ending. So since we
Ooh,
understand that
tell me.
John isn't actually present for the events that are happening in Chapter 2, let's look at some of the other things he's given knowledge of in this sort of vision.
Sure,
Starting with
sure.
the Snake Meadow Hill Church. While exploring this church, other than the spindly lady randomly attacking you, there are some other things that we can come across. For one, John can find a confession booth located in the side of the church. When stepping into the confession booth, this scene plays.
What is it, a nun attacking you?
Pray for me, Father,
Ow.
for I have sinned. What sins have you done to confess? I tried to save a girl from evil, but my fears overcame me.
Fails.
I turned my back on the ministry and broke my vows to God. A year later, the girl reached out to me again, but in the end, I couldn't save her. I left her to die. I am sorry for me and my past sins. Thou hast said will, hearing my penance. Bring the child to me, perform the sanctification, and thou shalt have the peace thou seekest. Give thanks to the Lord for him good, for his mercy endures forever.
So this opens up some
Interesting.
questions. For one, we know that John is talking about his experience with Amy.
Yes.
And her attempt to save her the second time was the events of Chapter
Failed,
1.
right.
And as we saw at the end of Chapter 1,
Failed.
John still couldn't save her. However, the demon specifically asked John to bring him a child, which, believe it or not, is something we can actually do. While exploring the rest
way.
of the church and walking to the altar at the front of the auditorium, we come across several depictions in stained glass. Most of these are normal, a depiction of an angel, a depiction of a cross, but then we have this one depiction of a figure with a hand flying out of its face.
Like Amy.
This, of course, elicits memories of Amy back in Chapter 1. But then combine that with the note we read earlier of someone seeing a red figure with a hole for a face. Are these all referring to Amy, or is this something that either the cult or the demons
Has
is
done
causing
before.
to happen? And by causing to happen, I mean to multiple people. Also, remember how when we were walking around the church earlier, we found the note from a paranormal investigation crew, the one that explained to us how the Spindly Lady game works?
Right.
Well, while exploring the church, you can actually find the 3 other notes that tell us what happened to that crew. We still
assuming
haven't
they
found a way
died.
into the basement, but we found something just as cool. A secret passage in the old confession booth leading to this hallway. Henry's going into town to buy a crowbar. We'll see if we can't get these boards off some of these doors. But that's not even the best part. We caught an EVP. You can't hear it on tape very well, but to us it kind of sounded like laughing. Thank God we brought the nice mic. We'll review it on the sound gear once we get back into town. Night 2. We're gonna be rich.
I'm assuming they
We've
died.
caught supernatural
They died,
stuff
probably.
on camera before, sure. Doors opening on their own, things falling off shelves, but nothing like this. Tonight, while we were trying the Spindly Lady game again, one of the candles lit up by itself as soon as Lars walked into the room. It was nuts, and we got it all on film. We're gonna make a fortune selling this to the TV stations. Night 3. Shouldn't have come here. Tape's missing. Lars stuck behind basement door. Henry hasn't come back yet. Can't leave anyway.
So yeah, they're probably
they're dead.
Fine.
They're gone.
Sure. You're probably picking up that this church has a lot of connections to everything else we've seen in the plot. Something happened here back in the 50s, and a group of kids somehow died. And in the prologue to chapter 2, we get some more explanation as to why this church is so important. But before we talk about the prologue, I want to talk about chapter 2's secret ending. Remember how when we went to that underground temple, there were the 3 symbols between us and the last note? Well, to get that note, the player has to perform 3 demonic actions. Now, why would John perform these 3 demonic actions? I don't know. It's not canon. John wouldn't actually do that, but it's fun for us, so why not make John do it?
For the
first
Lord.
of these actions can be performed after John's reflection stabs himself in the eye with the key inside of the Save family tomb. If, while dripping blood, John walks back to the series of rocks that he spawned in at the beginning of chapter 2, and then just as the note from the thrall that he killed in the cemetery instructed,
you want to make a
remember the
pentagram?
one that specified how to draw a pentagram, if John traces that track with his blood, it will cause a pentagram to appear and a demon to spawn in. This demon will charge at the player, but after defeated, drops another note.
Notes. New patient initial consultation. Subject, John Thomas Ward. Present, Dr. James Spinell, PhD, and 2 orderlies. Subject non-responsive for first half hour, followed by fragmented exorcism narrative. Subject unable to maintain consistency in story. For example, stating that Amy was in the basement and then saying she was in the attic. Subject insists incident was the result of demonic possession. Cannot declare subject of sound mind. Will require several more sessions to fully understand subject's mental state. Will advise Martin family attorneys.
So again, it gives us another note from John's time in a psych ward. This one calling out John for being an unreliable narrator, which actually highlights the thing I mentioned in chapter 1, where John's note goes from the description of Amy in the basement to the description of Amy in the attic. The attending physician is trying to discredit John's experience. We'll see another note from this doctor after we perform the second demonic act. Remember how in the church, the voice in the confession booth said that we need to bring him a child? Well, for our second demonic act, we bring him a child. If, after receiving this note from the demon in the confession booth, if John walks to the cornfield behind the church, the child that earlier was only spawning off the sides of the screen will now begin to follow John. He will follow John all the way back into the church, and if we walk in front of the confession booth, the mirror demon from chapter 1 will reach out and grab the child. This will then pull John into another boss fight. After the mirror demon is defeated again, we receive another note.
Subject is suffering from delusion. In John's mind, he plays the role of the hero sent by God to protect the innocent. In order to escape the consequences of his actions, he has created his own reality. In order for everything to make sense, he needs to believe in the evil spirits and paranormal occurrences. I recommend an in vivo approach until we can get John to accept the truth. And for the love of God, please have Miss Martin transferred to another facility. Somehow, John knows that she is in here with him.
So this letter is really interesting. For one, we see that the physician is again trying to denounce John's purpose, and he says things like John thinks of himself as a hero, but given the John we see, that's not at all the case. I believe the physician just hears John talking about demons and trying to save her, and thinks that John has a messiah complex, when in actuality,
John's just a victim of circumstance, of being at the wrong place at the wrong time and not being able to save anybody, so he feels indebted in anything. So he's not really much of a hero, he's just got survivor's guilt.
John thinks of himself as not a messiah at all and very unable and self-degrading because he couldn't save Amy. But what's interesting is that note at the end where the physician says that somehow John knows Amy is in the facility. And while the physician is saying that this is because John's delusional and maybe overly paranoid, so he just heard Amy was here, so he's freaking out, it's most likely because John, after the events of 1986, just witnessed the carnage that happened at the Martin household, and now knows that the demon is inside the hospital with him. Finally, the last demonic act we can perform is when John is transformed into the spider creature.
You're gonna kill them.
Crawling
Oh
thing
my
is.
God.
If, just before traveling beneath the bridge where he can see the couple working on a truck on top of the bridge, if John goes back down and
wow. John, after dying, did I kill enough people to get into heaven? Man.
up to get onto the bridge itself, John can kill the man and woman while in
Almost
this
got ran
demonic
over.
state of being. After that, he can just loop back down and then go about the level as usual. After all three of these acts are performed, if John goes back to that setting in the underground temple, all three of the symbols will now be gone. Again, each symbol represented a separate demonic act.
Yeah.
If you had only performed 1 or 2 demonic acts earlier, when you come to this section now, 1 or 2 of those symbols will be gone, but you can't get to the note without doing all 3.
Well done,
God
thou
damn it.
good and
Why are you the narrator for this red text? It's taking me out of the seriousness of this. Well done, thou good and faithful servant. We shall
Faithful
visit
servant.
thee soon.
we shall visit thee soon.
Then, at the end of chapter 2, after John awakes in his house, instead of picking up the note and ending the chapter as he normally would, now if John walks into his kitchen, the back door is open, and walking out the back door leads to this
Why
cutscene.
so serious? Ooh, music. Whoa. It's the big monster.
Now, of course, this isn't canon. John didn't do those demonic actions in his dream in the through storyline of the game, but if, again, the player wants to do this for funsies, he can condemn John's soul to hell forever. I'm a fan of this ending for a few reasons. For one, typically in video games, the bad ending is the one you get for playing through the game normally, and the good ending
It's the
only
one by
comes once you
doing-
do all of these hidden steps.
Yeah.
And as we'll see, that's certainly true for chapter
FNAF? FNAF, anybody? You only get the good ending if you do the extra stuff.
3, but here in
God
chapter 2, you
damn
have
it.
to work for the bad ending.
Yeah.
While I was talking to Erdorf, he gave me a very compelling response as to why that is. In a lot of secular beliefs around demons or demonology or even theology in general, there's kind of this laissez-faire approach to possession of sorts or demonic influence. Like, a lot of movies and stuff you'll see will depict someone just going about their life as per usual, and then one day, oh no, I've got a demon in me. So sad. But as Erdorf discussed, it's not like that at all. As a matter of fact, it normally takes a long series of commitment, of belief, and of practice for someone to truly give themselves over to evil forces. That just as one must dedicate themselves to following after God and holiness, one must dedicate themselves to following after Satan and evil. And of course, the depictions
In other words, demons have standards. They're just not gonna, take over anybody. You have to be devoted just like you would be devoted to God. They don't take secondhand chums. They take good, stout, and very, very, very dedicated followers.
demons and the supernatural throughout these
Not you, random homeless man on the street named Jerry. Not you. It has to be somebody committed. Accidentally untabbed on that one.
games is very overt, very in your face, not quite, how it really happens. But those elements of real Satanism or demonic activity or what have you are translated into the game in their own way. In other words, you don't trip backwards into joining a demonic cult. John has to perform a ritual to summon the demons, and then he has to give a child to the demons, and then he has to kill 2 people himself. And of course, John in the game doesn't do that, but it does give us insight as to what some of these cult members might have had to do in order to gain their status in the cult.
It does.
Because as we're going to see, especially in chapter 3, these people are absolutely vile. And it's one of the most disturbing and best parts of the whole series. Can't wait to talk about it. So with all those details of chapter 2 out of the way, let's talk about that prologue, and maybe finally answer some questions as to what started this whole mess. Given that the prologue is unlockable after completing Chapter 2, and if the player starts the prologue, it runs you through the prologue and then into Father Garcia's flashback that Chapter 2 normally opens with, and from there the rest of Chapter 2, we can assume that the prologue is also a part of John's.
Bruh. Bruh. No. 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 No, no. 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 Just why are you my mod? How? Have you ever heard of hello? Have you ever heard of a hello? How are you? What do you mean your intro messages I failed NNN? Like, what? TMI! TMI, bro! TMI! Jesus! I'm trying to react here. That took me out.
Stream. As the prologue begins, we awake as John, whose vehicle has crashed on the side of the road. If we walk a little forward past the car, we can see that his car was actually ran off the road by none other than a thrall. The thrall seems satisfied with his actions, even in death, and if we walk off the screen and then come back, we can see that the thrall has left the vehicle. With nowhere else to go, John begins to walk into the cornfield, where he is suddenly attacked by this demon thing, whatever it is. And similar to boss fights we've seen earlier in the series, John must hold up his cross to reveal where the demon is at, and then from there defeat it in separate phases. After defeating the demon, we can exit the cornfield, and from there we see what appears to be a dead dog.
Oh, no, come on.
We receive our first note of the prologue.
Why the
About
puppy?
a week ago, we started hearing those awful noises coming from the adjacent fields. After 3 nights, the children were getting pretty scared. I told them it was just coyotes. That 3rd night, the noises seemed closer than ever. The dogs were panicking. I could hardly approach them. Then Greta, the last of that old line brought over by the German missionaries, broke loose and tore off into the corn. We all listened, too scared to go after her, as her barks faded away into the distance. After that, we had 2 nights of silence, besides the endless whispering of the wind blowing through the crops. But then, this morning, I stepped outside to see this fresh whore left at the edge of the field. There's something out there.
Of course, this note makes sense as we've seen things in the cornfield ourselves.
Yeah.
We're given a bit more clarification as to what the previous note was talking about after we exorcise a statue of St. Michael and receive this note.
What more could I have done? I warned them not to go into the fields. I warned them against straying too far from the sanctuary. Should I have shut them in their quarters and nailed boards over the doors? Now I am digging 6 graves here in the shadow of the church.
Wow.
6 little graves forever looking to St. William. Some of the boxes are empty. The scattered remains we found couldn't fill them all. But I know they're all gone. I know their souls were taken by that thing in the field. I will finish my gruesome work and then renounce the ministry. I don't want to see anyone from the sanctuary ever again, not even that girl who stayed inside the house last night. I don't believe in the devil anymore. Whatever did this is much, much worse.
This is in reference to the initial,
Wow.
I was about to say missing children incident, but that gives flashbacks of another 8-bit horror game indie franchise that we're not talking
I'm not gonna read that out, Kisoka. Kiz Dota. Kiz Dota. I'm just gonna call you Dota, alright? And I'm gonna call you Samuel.
about. But it clues us in that this note and the previous note were referring to the first event that's happened in the timeline.
Yeah.
We'll later find out that this note was written in the 1930s, and that for some reason 6 children were killed by whatever this thing was outside of the church.
I'm walking away. Why? What did I do?
But there's also that mention of the end of a woman who stayed inside when the 6 children died.
I was
Keep
thinking
in
about
mind,
that.
we're going to get an explanation for that in just a sec. Walking forward, we once again come across Snake Meadow Hill Church. And just outside of the church, we find...
Before we continue, very important question. Very important question, all right? Very important. Just because I'm opening a pack right now. I know YouTube, you guys want me to be watching this. I am watching it, trust. But are you guys a fan of Twizzlers? I'm eating some Twizzlers right now, and they're pretty alright. You know, they're pretty alright. They're not amazing, but you know, they're right to munch on. You know, they're good as a passive snack. If there's nothing better, I wouldn't mind munching on them. But they're not exactly something I'm gonna be going after. You know. But what are you guys' thoughts on Twizzlers? Yo, can you guys rate Twizzlers in the comment section, YouTube? You know, I want to know. You guys are a Twizzlers fan if you're still watching. You know what? Comment Twizzlers if you're still watching at this point or haven't clicked off. You know, let me know. Let me know who's the real one in chat. Or not in chat, in the comment section in YouTube, you know. Anyways, I give them like a 6 out of 10. A good 6 out of 10. They're not bad, but they're not amazing. The ones you could put apart are good. Twisters? Oh, Twizzlers. Yeah, they're not bad. These are Twizzlers Twist. Anyways, besides that little detour, let's continue.
Find this note.
We have a new volunteer to look after the children and take care of things around the sanctuary. Sister Bell. She came highly recommended by the main office in Hartford. Bringing her in marks the completion of staffing the church after...
Yes. All right, I'm back. Welcome back. That's a great emo.
all these years. The church has been very careful about letting out what happened to those children. As far as I can tell, I'm the only one left who knows about it. Soon I'll be gone and the sanctuary will be able to go back into service, having finally left those dark times behind. We've received clearance to move in a new group of children, 3 next week and another 3 sometime next month.
So this is taking place after the previous series of notes that mentioned 6 children dying, that now the orphanage is allowed to have another 6 kids brought in, and that they're under the watchful eye of Sister Bell. Walking into the church itself, the layout has changed.
Well, seeing how the church is now, I don't think that went well.
Slightly from how it normally is in chapter 2. Again, all of this is in a dream, so it makes sense that the rooms aren't the exact way we know them to be previously. But there's still some of the mainstays, like the sanctuary and this weird cross that says "Thou shalt not kill." While walking into the area where the confession booth was previously, if John exercises a chalice, a demon will appear. After defeating the chalice demon, we receive this note.
Sister Bell seems like a naturally cheery person, but when the new children arrived, she became positively elated. She doles over them constantly, takes them on walks, and tells them stories long into the night. I've seen her engaging in strange behavior. We don't teach the children much dancing or singing besides what is found in the hymns, but I've seen the children dancing around Sister Bell in a circle from time to time. While they dance, she stands still and looks up at the sky as if listening to something. On another occasion, I found all 6 children standing in a line just outside the cornfield where Sister Bell was standing and talking to them. These odd games don't bother me too much since she's so good with the children. Her cleaning is excellent too. As soon as she arrived, she seemed to just instantly know her way around.
While the person writing this note is okay with Sister Bell being weird, I'm absolutely not. Because, and I know I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit with the timeline stuff, but this note was written around the 1950s, right? Okay, so we have 6 kids that died
that were murdered in the cornfields, and this lady's just making them, do all this stuff. It's super weird. It's weird. Ring around the rosy. Moxie and a Posey, ashes, ashes, we all fall down.
In the 30s, and then we have another set of 6 kids here in the 50s, and then when the game takes place in 1987, no one's there. The church is shut down, and there's all these notes that, oh, there's a demon lady you can summon, the spindly lady and all that, from this creepy story of when the church shut down in the 50s. So Sister Belle spinning around with the kids in the cornfield and just looking up at the sky, don't like it. Walking into the sanctuary of a church, we find yet again another note.
They couldn't have given me a worse last case before retirement. Old Catholic church out in the middle of nowhere, 1 missing woman, 4 missing kids, and 1 deceased old nun. The brothers and sisters, or whatever the hell the people that work there call themselves, are all terrified, and worse, superstitious. All except Father Clark, who runs the place. Him and I drive along the farm roads at night, looking for signs of the missing people, and he makes for pretty good company. There are 2 kids left. Twins. Say they were asleep the night the 4 went missing. They also claim that the woman, Miriam Bell, isn't actually gone. When I ask where she is, they look at each other, then back at me, and tell me to ask her myself.
All right, so this makes it interesting. This is an investigator who is looking into 4 kids that went missing again around the 1950s.
Yeah.
He says that he is working at the church with someone named Father Clark. Because of that, we can assume that the previous notes describing Sister Bell and her behavior were written by Father Clark. So we have Sister Bell and Father Clark, who is managing everything going wrong at the church, and then all of a sudden, 1 lady disappears, an old nun dies, and 4 of the kids go missing. We also see that Sister Bell's full name is Miriam Bell, and that the 2 kids who didn't go missing, the twins, are confused when the investigator asks where Belle is, because they say, simply talk to her, she's right here. If the player then goes to the right side of the church and exercises a painting of the Virgin Mary, as John tries to leave, a thrall will run out of a pile of brush, or trash, or whatever that is, and sprint towards the player. If the thrall gets to John, he'll kill him, but if Jal repels the thrall will run away saying that they couldn't help themselves, that they're sorry. It gives the eerie notion that perhaps some of these cult members are initially volunteering or want the power of the demons, but at some point have no control over their actions. Then when John comes back into the sanctuary, there will be another note.
This morning we found these very odd subjects around the church. The best way I can describe them would be large, life-size dolls made of sticks and dead tree branches. Someone must have placed them there while we were sleeping. Hoodlums, maybe, or a group of weirdos? The twins seem fixated on these doll things. They stare out the window at them all day. I even heard them shout that they saw Miriam standing around them, but when I looked, there was nobody there. Maybe it's the strange behavior of the twins, or the hours of driving these farm roads at night, but this place is getting to me. I keep having the same nightmare where I'm standing outside the church looking out into the fields. I can see people looking back at me through the rows of corn. Their bodies are painted red.
So once again, we have another letter from our investigator. And it seems that the church is starting to get to him. What's interesting here is the mention of these stick figure-like effigies. We've seen these before. If you'll remember in chapter 2, when we go through the room where we had to...
I just realized we never found out what that tree thing was and why it exists.
Figure out the puzzle with the runes on the floor, and then we see the blood across the floor that says Mother of Demons. There were 6 of these effigies in that room. And also, after John was transformed into the spider thing, during that really weird segment in chapter 2, he was surrounded by these things, all in the field around him. As a matter of fact, his spider form kind of looked like one. And here in the note, we see that the 2 surviving twins are obsessed with these new effigies that have appeared outside of the church. And if I had to bet, I'd say there's probably 4 of them. It's in my opinion that these effigies are the husks or destroyed bodies of people who have fully given themselves over to demonic forces, or at the very least have been possessed or taken by demonic forces. We saw at the beginning of chapter 2, when moving through the graves, that these people who had given themselves over to the cult, even if some, like the child who just wanted to talk to his grandfather, did so without knowing what they were getting themselves into, we saw that the forms they took on were not human in any regard. They became these floating ghosts that had supernatural powers. So I think once you have ascended, or I guess descended, past the need for your physical body, your body becomes this thing. Or perhaps, alternatively, the effigies are made as some sort of ritual to make your body rise to a different version. Maybe it's not your physical body, but it's at least a stand-in of where a person used to be, either physically or symbolically. Another thing to see in this church is, again, when walking to the altar, this time there are several cultists sitting in the pews of the church. And then after exercising the weird glass window of the hand flying out of the angel, Virgin Mary, whatever that is, face, the cultist will begin to twitch and spaz out, eventually attacking the player. After walking into another room and repelling another thrall, a final note will appear in the sanctuary, and the door to the basement will now be open. This final note that we find in the sanctuary reads as follows.
I should have known this place was no good. The signs were all around me. The disappearances, the creepy twins, the life-size stick dolls. 4 of them. Around 2 a.m, we woke up to the sound of an old woman's cackle coming from the hallway outside the twins' room. I know this sounds crazy, but when we got to the hallway, the laughing was coming from a painting of the Virgin Mary. We thought we had lost our minds. Just then, we heard a loud noise coming from the chapel. We got there just in time to see Miriam drag the twins down the stairs leading to the basement. I drew my service weapon, but was stopped by Father Clark. He said something about God's work and headed down the stairs, sealing the opening of the stairs behind him. The stairs don't seem to open from this side. All I could do is wait. I can't describe the noises I heard down there.
Well, unfortunately, Father Clark did not make it out.
But one thing is certain, the devil is real. To anyone reading this, please, for the love of God, don't go down into that basement.
So, the cat's out of the bag. Miriam Bell is the cause, at least initially, for the demonic activity at the church. And as a matter of fact, as confirmed by Erdorf in our interview, all the way back in the 1930s when the initial 6 kids were killed, she was the woman who was left behind in the church. So in the 1930s, Miriam Bell, at the time probably not a sister or at least not a high-ranking nun, she was just a worker or perhaps even a visitor at that church, most likely performed some kind of demonic action or pact that condemned the 6 children. After the 6 kids are killed and the church shuts down its orphanage for a while, Sister Bell goes to perhaps a seminary school of some sort and eventually receives her status as an official sister. At that point, everyone from Snake Meadow Hill Church has left the ministry over the events that happened to those 6 kids.
The 6 kids.
So now in the 50s, when Father Clark takes over and is looking for a nun to help him run the orphanage, Sister Bell is, of course, ready and willing to sign up. So Sister Bell comes back, as we could see from the notes describing how the kids would dance around her and sing in the fields. Miriam is once again putting her demonic influence on these children. This culminates when 4 of the kids go missing, and it seems that the other 2 are still under some kind of demonic spell. Now, initially, you may think that Miriam Bell is the old nun who died, but I don't think so. I believe she is the woman that went missing. Although now, as read in this note, she's back, and it's not good. Because the investigator says that Miriam Bell dragged the 2 remaining children down the stairs into that basement. Father Clark, effectively saying that the gun won't do anything and that this is God's fight, decides to travel into the basement alone and seal it off behind him. This lines up with the note we read from Father Clark in chapter 2, right before going into the basement ourselves, in which Father Clark mentioned that his watch is stuck at 2 a.m., that he hears a demon further down in the tunnels, and as we can assume, probably dies. So John ventures into the basement himself, and this time, instead of coming across a puzzle, he comes across, once again, the basement demon, the same one found in chapter 2 within the candy tunnel. The fight here is much the same, with the purple twins appearing around the room and John only being able to fight the demon with a flashlight. Well, I mean, he's still fighting it with the cross, but he needs the flashlight to see. When the fight is over and John begins to leave the basement, he'll find the final note of the chapter 2 prologue.
Here is the ritual of the door to...
God. I'm sorry, I can't take it this seriously. I might as well narrate it well. Here is the ritual of the door to hell. Let no brother or sister utter it. He that is master of spirits, let 3 spirits that follow the dragon be put into the effigy of the accursed. Only then can it be purified. You will know it is time when its eyes glow red. To enter the unseen world, destroy the purified effigy with fire. Then shall the door to hell be opened. Taking notes. Don't take notes.
No brother or sister utter it. He that is master of spirits. Let 3 spirits that follow the dragon be put into the effigy of the accursed. Only then can it be purified. You will know when it's time, when its eyes glow red. To enter the unseen world, destroy the purified effigy with fire. Then shall the door to hell be opened.
This will mean something to the Chapter 2 Prologue's alternate ending. Yes, even the Prologue has an alternate ending. For the normal ending, if John comes out of the basement and then walks towards the altar at the front of the church, John will see the twins standing on stage. However, when he tries to approach them, the nun from the end of Chapter 2 will suddenly appear and utter the phrase, "My little one," before the screen cuts to black and we're then thrown into the beginning of Chapter 2. And if you haven't figured it out already, the nun that we fought in Chapter 2 at the end boss fight with Father Garcia is Miriam Bell. So Miriam Bell, again, was there in the 30s, she was there in the 50s for both instances of dead children. And now, all the way in 1987, in John's vision, her influence is still very strong at the church, appearing there at the end of the prologue and appearing for the boss fight at the end of Chapter 2. So it seems that Miriam Bell is the inception of everything that's going wrong. For the secret ending of the Chapter 2 prologue, if after leaving the basement demon fight, John walks out of the church and all the way back to the cornfield with his crashed car from the beginning of the prologue, he will see that now the Scarecrow is surrounded by a series of demonic symbols.
Oh no.
If John exorcises the Scarecrow and then walks up to it, he'll see that its face is now an open hole.
Of course.
Again, more of that imagery of this demonic cult causing people's faces to just be like a pit of sorts. Specifically, the eyes of the Scarecrow will now glow red, or where the eyes should be. If you'll remember that last note we found in the prologue about the effigy of the accursed and whatnot, it says that after being purified, the eyes will glow red, and then it says to enter the unseen world, destroy the effigy with fire. So if John walks back to where his car was at the beginning of the prologue, the car is now on fire. John sets himself on fire and then quickly sprints to the Scarecrow, lighting it on fire as well. As the Scarecrow burns, the twins will appear at the top of the cornfield, and an additional 9 children will walk out from the sides of the corn and stand around the burning John and the burning Scarecrow. Suddenly the screen will cut and John will once again be transformed into this spider creature surrounded by several stick effigies. He'll walk through fields of these creatures until eventually he finds Miriam Bell. Upon approaching her, she will turn and scream at John before once again we start back with Father Garcia at the normal beginning of Chapter 2. So what does this ending do? They both pick up with Chapter 2 as normal,
Children
and it's
of
all
the
a dream,
Corn.
so the events of what happens to John doesn't really matter, right? It's just the things that he's witnessing that matters. This is real history and characters he's witnessing that he normally wouldn't be privy to while he's awake, but again, this dream is a sort of vision. So what is the significance of this alternate ending? Well, in the normal ending, Miriam Bell appears, says, "Here I am," and then "my little ones." Whereas here we have John lighting himself on fire, and then a Scarecrow on fire, and then becoming the spider thing, and Miriam screams in the camera's face.
It's pretty confusing.
I think the most important detail about this alternate ending is that scene of the children appearing out of the corn as the Scarecrow is burning. We have the twins, who have been very elusive up to this point, appear, but then 9 other kids. If you'll remember, 6 children died at the church in the 1930s,
and then 4 were
more
missing.
died in the 1950s, and then the 2 twins were dragged into the basement, supposedly also being killed, which adds up to 12 kids in total. So then why, as the Scarecrow is burning, do only 11 children show up? More on that in a bit. But now we're done with all of Chapter 2, and it's filled in a lot of gaps. Miriam Bell seemed to kick all of this off. When she was at the church back in the 30s, she probably caused the demon in the corn to appear that killed the dog, that killed the 6 kids, that killed the 4 other kids, and then, or at least it probably killed the 4 other kids, or she killed the 4 other kids, doesn't really matter, and then she dragged the 2 kids in the basement, supposedly killing them. She is our first event in the timeline. All of this begins with her act of evil and her act of devotion to Satan. And then from there, we can start to put together in our heads how the rest of it played out. In the 1950s, the church was shut down, again because of Miriam Bell, led to things like the death of Father Clark. It led to a lot of superstition arising in the town, and then from the notes that we saw from the thralls or ghosts that we killed at the beginning of chapter 2, we see that the demonic cult suddenly gained a lot of influence in the last 30 years. Either under the command or the command of the spirit of Miriam Bell, they are inducting new members into their cult daily. And from what little aspects we see of the cult, they're not exactly a charity organization, between animal sacrifices and cutting people's faces open, or at least making holes appear in people's head.
Yeah.
Not a lot of clarification on that yet, but we'll get there. But Miriam Bell seems to be the start of all of it. So that begs the question, who's Gary? Because we hear Gary mentioned a lot.
I forgot about Gary.
The game itself, we see the message, Gary loves you. So what does Gary have to do with Miriam Bell, and why is every other note we read supposedly written by this figure named Gary if Bell's the one in charge? These are all questions to ask ourselves as we move towards chapter 3. The other thing I want to mention is the spindly lady herself. So at the beginning of chapter 2, we have a setup as to what a lot of these ghosts or demons that we were fighting are. They were previously people in a past life or before they gave themselves over to demonic influence. While in the tombs, we had the boy who wanted to talk to his grandfather, the man who wanted more power, and the woman who had a miscarriage. And as mentioned, each of those ghosts correlate to their fighting style and appearance. The woman with the miscarriage is very gross, considering the tail for YouTube, but very creepy. I love weird Silent Hill-esque monster designs like that. But nevertheless, we see that these demons were previously people. Well, remember how there's that quick mention in the notes from the investigator that when the woman went missing, which we can assume to be Miriam Bell, an old nun died? Well, initially, I thought that was referring to Miriam Bell herself. I thought she was the old nun, but that doesn't really make a lot of sense. For one, she could still be alive in the 1980s, or that might be her ghost or something, who knows. But when we see Miriam Bell, she is not the same form of the spindly lady that we fight in chapter 2. I think that this old nun that died was someone that either willingly joined Miriam's side, or maybe Miriam effectively sold their soul or killed them in some kind of demonic sacrifice. Maybe Miriam used her blood and her body for the sacrifice that would lead to the death of the other children. And I think that this old nun became the spindly lady. My other evidence for that is that in the initial note you read that describes the spindly lady game, they mention an old nun from the 50s, so that's the phrase old nun used twice. But just like those victims that we fought in the cemetery, the old nun became the spindly lady who we fight within the church. Again, another example of this cult and demon's influence, and that it's causing a lot of people to die and suffer a lot. I believe that should be everything for chapter 2. The last thing I want to mention is in the note that John reads that devolves into a bunch of demons talking about how you can't kill the snake, John, and all that, you see the phrase pandemonium regnat mentioned over and over, and that's even something that a lot of the demons who the thralls that charge at you will say. Pandemonium regnat is Latin for chaos reigns. Chaos reigns is something that was seen in chapter 1. In one of the notes, it is something that several of the thralls will mention. So sometimes the thralls. So sometimes you'll see Pandemonium Regnat or Chaos Reigns. It means the same thing. But for my Wendigoon fans, those who've kept up with the channel or just know literature, you'll remember that when we covered Paradise Lost, we learned that the word pandemonium came from John Milton as a Latin phrase to say all demons. And that from there, the word pandemonium was used as a synonym for chaos because the house of pandemonium in hell, as described in Paradise Lost, was this giant palace where they planned on how to take over the world. So in effect, chaos. So really, when you hear the phrase pandemonium regnat, it doesn't just mean chaos reigns as is shown throughout the story, like with the thralls yelling it. It also means all demons reign, which is really a note to the cult's true intentions, to bring about the rule of demonic forces. And I believe that should be everything with Chapter 2. So at this point, we have seen everything that led up to the demonic possessions that have occurred throughout the story. It makes sense as to how all of this affected Amy Martin, because Snake Meadow Hill Road, where the Martins lived, is related to Snake Meadow Hill Church. So Sister Miriam caused all this to take place, which eventually led up to John Ward in 1986 going to exorcise young Amy Martin. All of that went wrong. He was put in a psych ward. He tried again in 1987, and that went wrong as well. And Chapter 2 ends with John Ward driving away, determined to save Jason and Nate Martin with the aid of Father Garcia, but the cult is hot on his trail, ready to stop him. And of course, at the end of all of this, the question, who's Gary? All of that will be revealed as we get in to Chapter 3. Now,
that is exactly where I'm gonna call it for the chapter, for this reaction here, you know? We've covered 2 hours and 8 minutes of this. Honestly, I want to see where this goes, but we have a lot of things to record today, so this is where we're gonna call this one here. I very much enjoyed it. This was a good so far. I'm liking the story. Right? For an Atari-esque game, it sure has a lot of lore, and that's great. I love my lore, and honestly, it doesn't look too bad. It looks fun, interesting, and hydrate. Give me a second. Let me say my outro. You know. Anyways, if you guys enjoyed, don't forget to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell, because it's very, very, very cool. Besides that, though, I hope you guys enjoyed. I'm getting hurt, and I'll see you guys later. Bye bye, YouTube.